The Mute at Hogwarts. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 26, a chapter without Guan Qiong. John put away his wand. Ron and Neville were stunned. "John, you're so handsome," he exclaimed. Neville, beside him, also looked at John with admiration. John simply shrugged. Malfoy was much lighter than a troll. Suddenly, cheers erupted from the side. Students stood up and excitedly cheered toward the field. Ron and Neville remembered where they were and nervously looked toward the Quidditch pitch. Both players were motionless, suspended in midair. In the center of the field, Harry sat on his broom, his head raised, his arms raised. The golden snitch was clutched tightly in his hand. He had won Gryffindor 150 points, and the match itself. "Oh, Harry! Look! Harry won! Harry won! Gryffindor won!" Ron said, his voice even louder than before, waving his hand as he spoke to Neville beside him. The deafening sound echoed throughout the Quidditch pitch, and Guan Qiong felt like she was going deaf. Sure enough, she still wasn't used to it. Guan Qiong thought, covering her ears. "Oh, so none of you saw Snape, and none of you saw how I caught the snitch in the locker room?" Harry, clutching his forehead, complained to Ron and Hermione. "Harry, you can't blame us. Malfoy just came over and provoked us." "You have no idea how nasty his words were," Ron explained to Harry. "Yes, it's a good thing that June taught him a lesson. Although it was a bit rough, it scared me." "I thought he was going to hurt Malfoy," Hermione said. "It wasn't rough at all. I even think it wasn't enough. It would have been better if he couldn't come to class, so we could have some peace and quiet." Ron stood up for Guan Qiong, his face filled with excitement. He turned to Harry and said, "Harry, you didn't see that. Joan was amazing just now." With just a wave of her hand, Malfoy and the other three were levitating. Ron tried to imitate Joan's movements, but he felt nothing could match her impressiveness. "It was a silent spell," Hermione explained. "Oh, yes, a silent spell. It was so cool. Malfoy couldn't react at all, couldn't even dodge," Ron said. Okay, that's enough. Let's just let it go. No more talk," Hermione called to the excited Ron. "Be careful, Snape deducts Joan's points for hurting a classmate," Hermione said. "Yes, Joan helped us. We can't hurt him." Ron covered his mouth and glanced around, wary of the possibility of Snape appearing. As for whether Snape would do such a thing, there was no need to prove it. They knew Snape's character too well. "Let's get down to business." Hermione brought the conversation back to their purpose. She looked at Harry and asked, "Did Snape make any moves or anything like that on the Quidditch pitch just now?" Ron was also watching Harry nervously, but Harry was in good condition, uninjured. "No," Harry shook his head. "In fact, Snape wasn't really officiating today's match. He was keeping his eye on Dumbledore. I guess he was afraid of being caught by Dumbledore." "Dumbledore? Did Dumbledore come to watch the game today?" Ron asked. "He didn't see Dumbledore." "Yes, Professor Quirrell was here too, right next to Dumbledore," Harry said. "No wonder he didn't make any moves. If he had really made a move on you, Dumbledore would have been the first to notice." Hermione finally understood. "Only, this means we've lost another chance to prove to Joan that Snape is a bad guy," Hermione sighed. "If Joan hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed it. After all, Snape was kind to him. Even giving him an expensive potion last time," Ron said dejectedly. "If you could mix and brew all the potions perfectly in potions class, Snape would have been kind to you, too," Hermione said. "I don't think so," Ron shook his head. "He couldn't even tell Aconitum Carmachilii from Aconitum Davidianum, let alone the complicated brewing methods. Even if while his hair fell out, he probably wouldn't be able to remember them. So, we're on our own. Joan is our friend. We can't make things difficult for him. He's already been bothered enough by what happened today," Harry said. He noticed the big Go Gryffindor sign and Joan beneath it. Honestly, the moment he saw Joan, he blamed himself for dragging her over to watch the game. He couldn't cheer with the others, couldn't cheer with them, couldn't even use his voice to cheer the players on. The Quidditch pitch was a carnival for everyone, but for Joan it was a deserted forest. He couldn't find anyone to empathize with. That feeling was awful. Harry felt a pang of unease just thinking about it. I think this matter doesn't concern Jean much either. We shouldn't burden him too much, Hermione agreed. Since you all say so, then all right, let the three of us protect the Philosopher's Stone, Ron agreed. Although he thought Jean was powerful, adding Jean might help them deal with Snape directly. After a discussion, the three of them couldn't come up with any concrete solution. In reality, they couldn't do anything about Snape except tell the other professors. And the other professors wouldn't believe them, just like Hagrid and Jean, because Snape was a professor and they were just students. Ultimately, they decided on one thing, to adapt and wait for Snape to reveal a flaw, just like when Hermione and Ron saw him hex Harry's broomstick with a curse during the previous match. Harry hadn't expected that flaw to come so quickly. An hour later, the three of them left the locker room. Ron and Hermione returned to the Gryffindor common room, while Harry prepared to return his Nimbus 2000 to the broom shed. Along the way, he thought about a lot, especially about Snape and the room on the 4th floor. The last time they ran into the room on the 4th floor, they only saw a large dog named Fluffy. He wondered what else was behind it, whether there were other things guarding the Philosopher's Stone. At this moment, he suddenly saw a hooded figure quickly walking down the main entrance of the castle and heading straight for the Forbidden Forest. Harry recognized it as Snape at a glance. He was very familiar with Snape's gait. He often saw such footsteps approaching him step by step in his nightmares. Without hesitation, Harry jumped on his broom and followed. Chapter 27, Magical Application of Softening Spell and Physical Strengthening. Inside Hagrid's hut, ham and pheasant hung on the ceiling, emitting a smoky aroma. A copper kettle boiled water in the brazier, and above the fireplace, a large shallow pan of rock cakes fried. Hagrid busily flipped the rock cakes, adding various ingredients he'd gathered from the Forbidden Forest. Just some ground rock and some bark would give the rock cakes their most enticing flavor. That's what Hagrid thought. Guan Qiong sat on the sofa, watching Hagrid's busyness with anticipation. He'd come here with Hagrid after the Quidditch match, for an experiment he'd envisioned. I didn't expect you to go to the Quidditch match. You didn't go to the last one, Hagrid said, flipping the cakes while chatting with Guan Qiong. Hermione and the others invited me. I really don't like Quidditch. It's too noisy, I'm not used to it. A flash of light shot out from Guan Qiong's wand, landing in front of Hagrid, saving him from turning around. He really wasn't that interested in Quidditch. With that much time, he'd rather practice magic or read more. While being on the Quidditch pitch was certainly exciting, that was the environment, not his own thoughts. By the time he left, everything felt dull, without a single memorable moment. He didn't even drink Whisper of Thought, simply because he felt it wasn't necessary. Well, Quidditch matches are noisy, and you're a quiet person, Hagrid said. He took his knife and tapped the rock pancake. A satisfied smile crossed his face when he heard the crisp sound. He placed the rock pancake on a plate and set it in front of Guan Qiong, looking at her expectantly. Try it, June. It's delicious. He was like a child eager to share a delicious meal, anticipating Guan Qiong's praise. He'd recommended rock pancakes to Harry and the others before, but they'd always said they were full, leaving him feeling disappointed for a while. Guan Qiong held up his wand, and a point of light flew from the tip. I think I need a cup of coffee. Oh, yeah, look at me. I forgot to pour you coffee. Hagrid slapped his head and stood up, turning around and starting to look for his coffee and cup. Guan Qiong smiled at Hagrid, who had turned his back on her, then turned his gaze to the rock cake in front of him. From a magical perspective, the rock cake was covered in a complete magical circuit, forming a three-dimensional shape, like a solid rock, which is why it is so strong. This thing can even be used as a weapon or protective item, at least it can block 2 spells. Guan Qiong waved his wand, and a wave of magical circuits appeared, falling towards the rock cake in front of him. Softening spell. The waves, like earthworms, continued to drill into the rock. As Guan Qiong continued to increase his magic power, he finally penetrated the outer layer of the rock. The entire rock-shaped magic circuit began to tremble, and Guan Qiong quickly controlled the magic circuit to weaken the effect. Then, under Guan Qiong's control, the rock, while still maintaining its exterior stability, was completely hollowed out from within. The rock cake, however, remained unchanged, save for a slightly weaker aroma. Before Hagrid could turn, Guan Qiong sheathed his wand, picked up a piece of cake, and placed it in his mouth. A crisp snap echoed from Guan Qiong's mouth as the rock cake broke, sending bits of it tumbling down. Guan Qiong chewed the rock cake. Even after softening, it still retained a considerable firmness, requiring him to use his cheeks to push it, but it was much better than before. The texture was rather like sand, and a bit harsh, making it difficult to swallow. "Oh, Guan Qiong, you've already started eating?" Hagrid placed a cup of steaming coffee in front of Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong took a swig, taking a deep gulp, and then swallowing the rock cake completely. "How is it? Is it delicious?" Hagrid stared at Guan Qiong nervously, his eyes wide open. "Not bad, just add some sugar," Guan Qiong said. "Putting aside the strange taste, the taste is indeed okay. After chewing for a long time, a light aroma will come back, a bit like vanilla cookies, but a little harder. As long as it tastes good, I'll add some sugar to this pot," Hagrid responded happily, and got up to prepare to fry the second pot. Guan Qiong stuffed the rock cakes into his mouth piece by piece, eating them as if they were dinner. With a loud burp, Guan Qiong stopped his hand. At this time, all the rock cakes that had been cast with a softening spell were eaten into his body. "It seems that there is no feeling." Guan Qiong scratched his head and thought to himself. He remembered that he had observed Hagrid before. Rock cakes can strengthen the life circuit. He also talked to Hagrid later. Rock cakes are the only thing his mother left him. To Hagrid, rock cakes are the taste of his mother. Guan Qiong speculated that the rock cakes were probably food used by the giants to strengthen themselves. Or, rather than food, they were more like some kind of potion, since they contained a complete magical circuit, a characteristic of potions. "Wait, why is my head a little itchy?" Guan Qiong scratched his head. His face was itchy too. He touched his face, and it felt like something was growing on his skin. His feet were itchy too. "No, it was itchy inside me, too, in my bones." Guan Qiong activated his magical perspective and observed his body. A faint gray light now appeared on the green life circuits, seeping into them. At the same time, his life circuits expanded slightly, as if breathing. But only slightly, and if you didn't focus, it would be as if nothing was there. The physical abnormality came and went quickly. Before Hagrid could finish frying the next batch of rock cakes, Guan Qiong had returned to normal. He took slow, drawn-out breaths, sensing the difference in his body. There was indeed a change. His breathing was longer, his strength was stronger, and his skin felt a little rougher. However, it wasn't very noticeable, as if the effect wasn't enough. "June, the second batch is ready." I added sugar. Hagrid hurriedly took the second batch of rock pancakes out of the oven, put them on a plate, and placed them in front of Guan Qiong. He continued to look at Guan Qiong with anticipation, but all he saw was a loud burp. "I'm full." Guan Qiong touched her stomach, and points of light flew from her wand. Hagrid's eyes turned from anticipation to disappointment. But they soon brightened up again and asked Guan Qiong, "Will you come again next time?" "June, I mean, for the rock pancakes. Harry and the others don't like them." Guan Qiong felt the strength growing within her and nodded with a smile. "Of course, this time, I'll trouble you to take care of it." Hagrid cheered up, picking up the freshly baked rock pancake and, not afraid of the heat, stuffing it into his mouth. "I'm a little hungry too," Hagrid said. A sound like stone shattering came from his mouth, and crumbs fell from his mouth from time to time. Guan Qiong stared at Hagrid's body. The magic circuits were shattered and then entered Hagrid's life circuits. There were many more magic circuits than what Guan Qiong had just eaten. It seemed that she would have to come to Hagrid many times, Guan Qiong thought to herself, and burped at the same time. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28: The Incomprehensible Repair Spell. When Harry returned from the Forbidden Forest and told Ron and Hermione what he had heard, "You mean you saw Snape threatening Professor Quirrell and asking him to consider his allegiance?" Hermione said. "It seems the facts are clear. Snape has indeed returned to you-know-whose arms. It's a pity that Guan Qiong didn't see it," she said regretfully. "That's good. The three of us have caught Snape," Ron sighed. "The only problem is how to convince others to believe us." Snape also asked Professor Quirrell if he knew a way to get past Fluffy, and said he was looking forward to Quirrell's secret trick. Harry analyzed what he had heard. I assume there must be other mechanisms guarding the Philosopher's Stone besides Fluffy. Perhaps each professor has set up a barrier, Harry said. But the barrier set by the other professors must have been broken by Snape. Snape has worked with them for many years. They won't doubt Snape. They might even reveal the method themselves. Hermione looked at the two of them. That means Professor Quirrell is the only one left. He's an outsider professor of defense against the dark arts and isn't familiar with Snape, so he's wary. He didn't let Snape know the way through, which is why Snape threatened him. I never thought the Philosopher's Stone's safety would ultimately depend on Professor Quirrell, Ron muttered, feeling uneasy at the thought of Professor Quirrell's pale face, flickering eyes, and stuttering voice. I have a feeling Snape will steal the Philosopher's Stone next week at most, Ron said hopelessly. But Quirrell was braver than they had imagined. In the following weeks, even though every time they saw him, they felt like he was going to die, he persevered. The trio's impression of Quirrell began to improve. While his teaching was certainly terrible, he was indeed protecting the Philosopher's Stone with his life. Hermione told Guan Qiong about this incident, including Professor Quirrell's efforts. Guan Qiong simply forced a helpless smile and said nothing more. Meanwhile, Hermione began to make a review plan, as there were only 10 weeks left before the exams. Harry and Ron complained bitterly, but there was nothing they could do. When Hermione tried to pull Gwen along, she realized it had been 2 weeks since she'd last told Gwen about Professor Quirrell. She hadn't spoken to Gwen once in those 2 weeks, and she wasn't even in the library. The room of requirement. Today's room was a little different. Besides the scarecrows that served as fixed targets and the machine that launched frisbees, there was a vast collection of porcelain. Vases, teacups, teapots, pots, and other items were all there. Gwen stood in the middle of the porcelain, calmly waving her wand. Dozens of vases flew up, hovering all the way to the ceiling. Then Gwen retracted the levitation charm, and the porcelain plummeted under the pull of gravity, hitting the ground and exploding. Gwen watched calmly as the porcelain shattered without blinking, then waved her wand again. Dozens more teacups took flight, controlled to float in the air, then fell and shattered. The fragments were larger this time, simply because of the height. With another wave of the wand, the teapot flew up, but this time lower, barely reaching Guan Qiong's head. Then, it plummeted back down, shattering into pieces. Because of the height, the teapot was only shattered into a few pieces, some even missing only a corner. Guan Qiong surveyed the scattered debris, took a deep breath, and waved his wand vigorously. Simultaneously, the magic within him surged toward the wand. Restored, the magic surged, covering the scattered fragments. As if they came to life, they rose from their dormant state and searched for the rest of their bodies. As the bouncing fragments finally coalesced, the cracks between them slowly vanished, as if they had never existed. Pristine porcelain pieces appeared before Guan Qiong, one by one, just as before. Guan Qiong watched the entire process unfold, and only when the pieces were repaired did he slowly exhale. He found a place to sit down, rubbing his brow, a look of annoyance on his face. The mending charm is a universal spell, used to repair broken items. Many children from wizarding families might first encounter and learn it. It's also mentioned in the standard book of spells, elementary, but it's not a major focus of instruction. Professor Flitwick casually explained it for just 10 minutes, concluding the lesson. After a few simple practices, almost everyone mastered this simple magic. Guan Qiong, however, struggled with this spell for 2 weeks. Unable to see the magical circuitry of the spell, he learned it the same way as others who cast spells silently, by concentrating on the spell's effect in his mind and simultaneously channeling his magical energy through his wand. The magic was cast. It was indeed incredibly simple, even casting it silently took him less than half a day. He then put the spell aside, even forgetting it for a while, because it was so common and basic. But then, his magical power grew stronger day by day, and his magical perspective allowed him to see more. Guan Qiong casually controlled a clay pot to fly over, then flung it to the ground. With a snap, the pot shattered into pieces. He then tapped his wand at the fragments, and magical power surged. The fragments began to move, and the pot began to heal. From Guan Qiong's magical perspective, the fragments formed a snowflake-like mosaic, or a riot of color. An indescribable presence permeated each fragment until they were fully healed, then vanished. Incomprehensible, uncontrollable, it was more like a phenomenon, one Guan Qiong couldn't currently grasp. This also gave Guan Qiong a deeper understanding of this wondrous world. He had assumed that, from his perspective, all wizarding magic held no secrets, only a challenge to learn. However, this seemingly universal household magic made Guan Qiong realize that the magical world held even greater mysteries than he had imagined. For example, the incomprehensible repair charm, which lacked even a magical circuit, and the fire charm, which he had yet to master. These spells had already taken up most of his time, so he didn't want to play house-like adventure games with the protagonists. Of course, he was interested in trying the final exam on the Philosopher's Stone and testing his own strength. But not now, as he still had some things to prepare. Chapter 29, Wandless Spellcasting and Dragons. In Hagrid's hut, Guan Qiong sat cross-legged on the sofa, the thick guide to keeping fire dragons open and resting on his lap, reading quietly. In front of him sat a plate of freshly fried rock pancakes and a cup of coffee. Between the Quidditch match and the Easter holidays, Guan Qiong had spent most of his time practicing spells in the room of requirement. The last 2 weeks had focused on restoration, and before that, illumination. The results were remarkable. Guan Qiong gazed at the book before him, his right hand dancing casually. Points of light appeared out of thin air, then focused, forming one word after another. This was the title of a short story in the Guide to Keeping Fire Dragons. Guan Qiong's wand lay in the pocket of his wizarding uniform, untouched and untouched. Indeed, after this period of continuous practice, he had finally mastered the silent and wandless casting of his first spell, illumination. This was the most basic spell, the first one taught in the standard book of spells, elementary. It was also the spell with the simplest structure of a magical circuit, as Guan Qiong observed it from a magical perspective. He also understood the significance of the wand to wizards. A wand stabilizes a wizard's magical output, allowing it to form a more stable circuit and achieve the desired effect. This is why young wizards who don't have a wand are more prone to magical accidents. Without a wand as a stabilizer, when their magical output is agitated, they lose control of their magic, causing it to surge wildly and unpredictably. Vanishing glass and people flying are minor incidents. Some young wizards with naturally strong magical powers can even blow up houses. Casting spells without a wand, on the other hand, involves removing this stabilizer and using one's mind to control the magic, ensuring a stable output and forming a circuit to achieve the desired effect. This is extremely difficult, almost impossible, comparable to asking someone who has always written with a fountain pen to suddenly write with a brush, and to produce characters of the same size and thickness. Unrestrained ink will simply scatter, quickly dissolving the entire canvas in black. Guan Qiong's natural talent wasn't much of a help in this area. He could only master wandless casting through constant practice. Fortunately, his magical power was constantly growing, exceeding 10 times that of other young wizards. This offered him the advantage of practicing spells without rest, allowing him to practice from morning till night. Through this period of practice, he finally mastered the first spell he had learned, the wandless illumination charm. Guan Qiong's fingers danced, and points of light continuously appeared, fluttering between his fingers like spirits of light, emitting a soft glow. With a flick of his finger, the points of light rapidly formed, forming lines of text. With a silent and wandless illumination charm, coupled with his own magically modified method of use, he would no longer need to hold his wand when chatting with others, otherwise others would think he was going to challenge him in a one-on-one fight. Of course, this was just the beginning. Other spells were still under development, but it would take time. After all, he was still a first-year wizard, having only been at Hogwarts for 7 months. Guan Qiong read the book in his hand, practiced the illumination charm with his fingers, and waited for Hagrid to return. He spent most of his time in the room of requirement, with a little time spent inside Hagrid's hut, reading the books he brought with him or the guide to raising dragons he bought for Hagrid. Of course, he also ate rock cakes to increase his physical strength. This wasn't a huge improvement, after all. He used a softening spell to partially destroy the rock cake's magical circuits before he could eat them. This also caused the rock cakes to lose a significant amount of the magical circuits they could attract. Fortunately, he wasn't trying to turn himself into a giant, so the effect was good so far. At least he was a bit stronger and 2 centimeters taller. Of course, this wasn't the main reason he kept coming to Hagrid's hut. After all, eating too much rock cake would make him feel bloated. He came for Hagrid's dragon. In the Philosopher's Stone, Hagrid was tricked by Quirrell into trading a dragon egg for a way to get through Fluffy, the 3-headed dog. Guan Qiong had been coming here all this time to wait for Hagrid's dragon. He wanted to observe the dragon, from hatching to breathing fire. He had a hunch that through the dragon, he could discover the reason for the constant changes in the magical circuits of the fire charm, and thus master it. With that, he had mastered all 6 of the main spells for a first year at Hogwarts. Furthermore, the fire charm was one of the few offensive spells. The only ones he could use were some minor curses passed around among students. They were fine for dealing with Malfoy, but they wouldn't be enough to protect him in the wizarding world. If he encountered a dark wizard, could he expect to defeat him by constantly making slugs appear in his nose? Summer vacation was approaching, and he had to prepare for it. Although his plans for this year weren't particularly dangerous, it was always good to be prepared. Having an extra measure was always a good idea. He hadn't waited for Hagrid to return with the dragon egg, but he had a feeling it would be today. Hagrid hadn't appeared. Today was Saturday, and after patrolling the Forbidden Forest last night, he had returned to his dorm to rest, while Hagrid said he was going to the village for a drink, as was his custom. But he usually returned after finishing his drink. It had never been like today, when he hadn't been seen until 10 o'clock in the morning. Luckily, he'd learned how to make rock biscuits from Hagrid beforehand. With food and drink, the wait wasn't boring. Plus, there was a good book to read. He didn't have to wait too long. Halfway through his rock biscuit, Fang's delighted roar could be heard from outside, followed by Hagrid's scare. Fang. Fang. Stop. Not today. Don't bump into me. Be quiet. Don't hurt the kid. Hagrid's loud voice, almost a roar, echoed from outside. Oh? What? Joan's here? No problem. I gave him a key. He likes my place, and he likes rock biscuits. There's no one better than Joan, Hagrid said happily, his voice drawing closer. The door opened, and Hagrid's massive body blocked the entrance, blocking out all the light. Hagrid's eyes were slightly red, clearly having just woken from a hangover, but his energy was so high that it felt like he had 2 lights. Hey. Joan, you won't believe what I got last night. Hagrid couldn't contain his excitement, shouting as if he wanted to let the whole world know. He clutched his belly tightly, as if there was a delicate baby there, and walked over to Joan excitedly and nervously. Joan, you'll like this too, you definitely will. After all, you like them as much as I do. Hagrid looked at the book in Joan's hand, his eyes almost shining. Dragon. Points of light suddenly appeared in front of Hagrid, then formed into words. Although they were question marks, Joan already knew the answer. He switched his magical perspective and looked at Hagrid's arms, his eyes shining with the same excitement as Hagrid's. Chapter 30 Dragon Egg Observation. Hagrid carefully lifted the dragon egg from his arms. It was a large, dark egg, the size of Hagrid's hand. It felt cold to the touch, its shell a bit rough. If you didn't tell them it was a dragon egg, anyone would mistake it for a rounded black stone. Guan Qiong activated his magical perspective. The egg's extraneous structures were ignored, leaving Guan Qiong with a glimpse of its essential essence. The magical circuitry within the egg was simple, 2 arcs of equal length connected at either end, and from that point, a third, longer arc extended. It resembled the wings and raised head of a dragon, or perhaps a crudely constructed crown. The egg itself was composed of countless finely woven triangular magical circuits, forming a hard shell that protected the life within. Guan Qiong was certain that even if Hagrid accidentally dropped it, it wouldn't break or be damaged. At most, the creature inside would be a little dizzy. If it had a head now. Guan Qiong waved his wand, and the notebook beside him flew into his hand. A quill also flew in the other direction. Throughout this process, his eyes remained fixed on the dragon egg, unwavering, with uncanny concentration. Oh, Guan Qiong, are you going to draw it? That's a great idea, documenting this child's growth. I'd love it, Hagrid said happily. Seeing Guan Qiong's love for the dragon egg, he was overjoyed to have found a friend with a similar interest. Put it down. Holding it all the time isn't a good idea. Perhaps you could start preparing it for hatching. A light appeared out of nowhere, forming a sentence that floated before Hagrid. Hagrid nodded in agreement, gently placing the dragon egg on the table and piling up the soft blankets on the sofa nearby to prevent it from rolling away. He let out a long sigh. To be honest, he had been extremely nervous all the way back from outside, fearing any mishaps. Guan Qiong began to draw the magical circuits he had just observed in his notebook, recording them below the fire spell. He had a hunch that this would help him master the fire spell that had always been elusive to him. Hagrid paced excitedly, back and forth, unsure of what to do. He'd kept many magical creatures, but never a dragon, and his experience in the field was practically zero. Then, he spotted the book Guan Qiong had placed aside. A guide to keeping fire dragons. Great, that's it. Hagrid slammed his left hand against the palm of his right, a childlike grin spreading across his face. He picked up the book. The thick, heavy guide to keeping fire dragons felt like a small booklet in Hagrid's trash can-sized hands. Carefully, Hagrid opened it and began to flip through the pages with half-closed eyes. Honestly, he hadn't touched a book since graduating 50 years ago, and reading the densely packed text made him feel a little dizzy. What is this? What is this? What kind of dragon is this? Hagrid flipped through the book, trying to match the characteristics of the dragon egg with the description in the book, but his head was spinning and he couldn't find anything relevant. Guan Qiong noticed this. He turned to look at Hagrid, and a point of light appeared in the air. This is a Norwegian ridgeback egg. It's detailed on page 152 of the Guide to Raising Fire Dragons. When hatching, it needs to be placed in a fire to simulate the mother dragon's breath and provide it with sufficient warmth. Oh, is that so? Hagrid flipped through the book, finding information on the Norwegian ridgeback, but the text was far too complex and wordy. A long section explained the origin and history of the Norwegian ridgeback. Dragon researchers generally believe that its ancestors originated in South Africa and were once among the tree dragons there, but the lack of solid evidence makes this nothing more than speculation. Guan Qiong sighed, observing the clear bewilderment that shone across Hagrid's wild and unruly face. After it hatches, it needs to be fed a bucket of chicken blood brandy every half hour. If conditions permit, it needs to be taken out for a lookout. A wide-open environment helps the young dragon's psychological development. Hagrid looked at the words floating in the air and exhaled. Thank you so much, Joan. I don't know what I would have done without you. Guan Qiong couldn't help but ask, Hagrid, how did you learn all your knowledge about magical creatures? Hagrid scratched his head and said, most of it I learned from dreams. I seem to have an innate understanding of how to care for them. The rest I learned from Professor Kettleburn, the professor of magical creatures at school. He's a very kind old man. Guan Qiong looked at Hagrid. From his magical perspective, Hagrid's life circuits only resembled those of humans in most respects. The rest was a completely unfamiliar structure. Furthermore, his overall life circuits were much thicker than those of an average person, protecting him from many spells. Guan Qiong suspected that this was a memory inherited from Hagrid's giant bloodline. However, Hagrid's mother left him long ago, and she clearly didn't teach him how to develop this power. Furthermore, because Hagrid's father was human, the memories of Hagrid's giant bloodline were likely incomplete, otherwise it would be difficult to explain the lack of knowledge related to dragons. Perhaps this was why Hagrid was so eager to raise a dragon. It was the desire of his bloodline. Of course, it's also possible that Hagrid himself wanted to raise a dragon. After all, in Hagrid's eyes, all magical creatures were adorable. The only difference was between the very adorable and the less adorable, the rare and the common. Guan Qiong had no answers for these questions, and could only make reasonable assumptions based on her limited understanding of Hagrid. However, Hagrid's lack of knowledge in this area gave Guan Qiong an opportunity to intervene in the dragon's care. It seems you don't know much about this, Hagrid. It just so happens that I've read a few books on raising dragons. Perhaps I could help you raise this dragon. Hagrid's face lit up with joy at Guan Qiong's words. That's fantastic, June. I knew you'd love this child as much as I do. Hagrid practically jumped for joy. He even tried to spin Guan Qiong around and do a couple of jumps, but Guan Qiong dodged him. Go get ready. Get plenty of chicken blood brandy, and some cabbage grass and flint. These will help it grow faster and spit out flames. Guan Qiong told Hagrid what he needed and asked him to prepare them while he continued to trace the dragon egg's magic circuit. Although he didn't quite understand it yet, it was always a good idea to write it down. Hagrid began to rummage through his boxes and drawers, finding the necessary items. Of course, the chicken blood brandy had to be purchased specifically. Although he had some in his hut, it was clearly not enough. Chapter 31 Hermione's Resentment. For the next few days, Guan Qiong settled down at Hagrid's place, even skipping the room of requirement, his usual haunt. His daily schedule consisted of classes and returning to Hagrid's hut to observe the dragon eggs. Hermione kept trying to get him to study for the final exam, but he always dodged. Reviewing first-year texts wasn't nearly as fun as observing dragon eggs. Furthermore, first-year material was all very basic, and history of magic, which was difficult for other students, was Guan Qiong's forte. The only slight challenge throughout his first year was charms, as he hadn't yet learned the fire charm. But observing the dragon eggs was precisely for this purpose, so he felt no pressure at all. Easter arrived. Hogwarts had 4 days off for the holiday, the first Sunday after the full moon on the spring equinox. Most students were unhappy about it, as the teachers had assigned a mountain of homework. Fortunately, Guan Qiong had his own unique approach to homework. Since this was a magical world, why not use magic to solve homework? Through his previous practice in the room of requirement, he had mastered the levitation charm to a degree unimaginable to most students. For example, he could control his quill, writing words with precision, just as he could align the light points of an illumination charm into words. Another example was his multitasking ability, using the levitation charm to control multiple objects simultaneously, much like he had previously controlled the porcelain. During training, vases, cups, teapots, and pots were scattered about the floor, yet he could use the levitation charm to control each piece of porcelain without disturbing the others. Furthermore, first-year homework wasn't particularly complex, and Guan Qiong had a firm grasp on the knowledge from each course, eliminating the need for manual research. As a result, Guan Qiong completed what would have taken others 4 days in just an hour. The rest of the time, of course, was spent observing the dragon eggs. To incubate the eggs, the fireplace in Hagrid's hut burned day and night, and life within them was constantly changing. The crown-like magical circuits Guan Qiong had observed earlier transformed into green circuits of life. At the same time, tiny, branch-like circuits began to sprout, slowly forming a reptilian shape. More tiny circuits appeared, forcing Guan Qiong to spend more time recording them. Although he couldn't understand much yet, writing them down brought him the joy of learning, just like taking notes in a university lecture. Hagrid wasn't in the hut today. He didn't know where he'd gone, but Guan Qiong didn't care. He went about his usual pace, eating rock cakes and drinking coffee while reading the library books he brought, occasionally checking the dragon egg to see if there were any new changes. He'd record any changes, and when the dragon began to spit flames, he'd be able to analyze and test the circuits he'd gathered, to see which ones would allow him to cast a fire spell. Just as Guan Qiong was halfway through the book he was reading, heavy footsteps were heard outside. It was Hagrid, only his weight could achieve this effect. Guan Qiong thought to himself, looking up. When the door opened, he noticed that besides Hagrid, there were others following him. Hermione, Harry, and Ron. What had brought them here? Guan Qiong looked at Hagrid, puzzled. Hagrid scratched his head, a look of shame on his face. He said to Guan Qiong, "Today I was going to the library to borrow some more books on dragon care to bring back for you, and then they found me. They also wanted to see the dragon eggs." Hagrid was holding several books, From the Egg to Hell, Dragon Species in Britain and Ireland, and The Death of a Dragon. The last was a novel about dragons, about a dragon teaming up with a knight to defraud humans. Hagrid probably only saw the title and didn't know the content, so he brought it here. In fact, the content of the first 2 books overlap with a guide to dragon care. It could be said that once you've read the guide to dragon care, the other 2 books were unnecessary. But Hagrid obviously didn't know that. After all, unlike Guan Qiong, he read a lot of books. Guan Qiong shook her head helplessly. Hagrid's concern was clearly overwhelmed. The dragon egg had completely messed up his already weak mind, and now it had even attracted Harry and the others. Harry, Ron, and Qiong exchanged a greeting before running to the fireplace to see what Hagrid's dragon egg looked like. Hermione, however, ran to Guan Qiong's side first, looking at him seriously. "I can't find you for a while now. So you've been hiding with Hagrid? Why didn't you tell me?" She seemed a little annoyed, perhaps because Guan Qiong hadn't reviewed with her, or for some other reason. Guan Qiong looked at the little girl, and a light appeared in the air. "This is illegal, huh? You knew it was illegal, and you and Hagrid kept the dragon egg a secret. Did you know that at the Wizarding World in 1709, Hermione put her hands on her hips and began to lecture Guan Qiong, reciting from the books she had read. But Hagrid loves dragons so much, I can't stop him." Guan Qiong didn't bother to argue with the stubborn Hermione, instead using Hagrid as a shield. Hagrid put down his book, blinking pitifully as he looked at Hermione. "Hermione, you know, my biggest wish is to have a dragon of my own," Hagrid said, his voice choking with sobs, thinking that if Hermione told the school, he would lose it. Hermione turned away with an uneasy expression. But it's illegal. Of course, if you insist on having one, I can't stop you. But you have to be careful not to let the school find out, or your dragon will definitely be sent away, Hermione warned. Guan Qiong smiled. He knew that despite Hermione's harsh words, she had a kind heart, especially towards her friends. He couldn't bring himself to do such a thing, so Hagrid's arrival was just the right thing to do. Thank you so much, Hermione, and thank you, June. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't know how to raise this little creature. Hagrid's sad expression faded, and a happy smile appeared on his face. Hearing what Hagrid said, Hermione turned her head and glared at Guan Qiong, but Guan Qiong ignored her. We also have something we need your help with. Ron came over from the fireplace and said to Hagrid. Ron, Hermione was puzzled. What did they need Hagrid for, and Hagrid couldn't help them with their exams or homework? What is it? If I can do it, I will definitely help you, Hagrid said, patting his chest. We want to know, besides Fluffy, what other mechanisms are there to guard the Philosopher's Stone, Ron said. Harry also came over from the fireplace. Yes, Hagrid, we want to know if the Philosopher's Stone is safe in the school. It must be safe. Hogwarts with Dumbledore here is the safest place in the world. Hagrid respected Dumbledore very much. Chapter 32 My brother who raises dragons in Romania. Hagrid, of course we know that, but we just heard something bad last time, Harry said. They then told Hagrid about the conversation Harry had overheard between Snape and Professor Quirrell in the Forbidden Forest, and warned Hagrid that Snape might come to him to find a way through Fluffy, and told him to be careful. Impossible, that makes no sense, Hagrid exclaimed. Professor Snape is a teacher at the school, and he helped design the trap. He couldn't possibly want to steal the thing. That thing? Hagrid, we know it's the Philosopher's Stone that Professor Dumbledore hid on the 4th floor, Ron said boastfully, raising his head. Oh my god, how did you know that? Keep your voice down. You can't talk about this kind of thing in school. Hagrid's face changed slightly, and he glanced around nervously, as if afraid someone would jump out at any moment. He glanced at Guan Qiong, but Guan Qiong's expression didn't change at all, clearly knowing about this as well. Oh my god, how many people know about this? Hagrid said, a little panicked. It should be just the 4 of us. We discovered it by looking for Nicholas Flamel. He was friends with Dumbledore, and they even collaborated on research related to dragon's blood, Hermione explained, comforting Hagrid. That's good, Hagrid patted his chest. He was really worried that these kids wouldn't know the seriousness of the matter and would spread the news. Of course, he knew Guan Qiong well and never spoke without thinking, so there was no need to worry. But the Philosopher's Stone isn't safe right now. Snape has always wanted it, and we have reason to believe he's cracked the other mechanisms. Now the only ones left are those set by you and Professor Quirrell, Hermione said. Professor Quirrell, Hagrid muttered. He knew the mechanism Professor Quirrell had set up. It was a troll. Professor Quirrell had previously offered him help taming it, but he had refused. The trolls had a strong smell, and he didn't want to touch them. If he got some on him and couldn't wash it off, he would never be able to touch other magical creatures again. But to say the troll was difficult to deal with was underestimating Snape. The troll's weak point was the back of its head, something any adult wizard should know. For a wizard like Snape, there were 100 ways to deal with a troll, let alone just one. Yes, Professor Quirrell, I guess he probably cast some anti-dark arts spell that Snape couldn't handle, so he threatened Professor Quirrell, Ron said confidently. Hagrid shook his head, feeling that these children had truly fertile imaginations. He absolutely didn't believe their claims, believing they had simply misheard or misunderstood something. Thinking of this, he glanced at Guan Qiong. If only all children were like Guan Qiong, reading, quiet, and not overly curious. Most importantly, they love dragons. Oh, and rock biscuits too. Guan Qiong was truly amazing. For the first time in years, Hagrid felt like he had found a soulmate. Okay, kids, let's not talk about this anymore. I don't believe Professor Snape would steal the Philosopher's Stone, so don't get involved in this. Exams are coming up, shouldn't you be reviewing your lessons? Hagrid cut the conversation short. As for the Philosopher's Stone, you really don't have to worry about its safety. With Professor Dumbledore in school, no one can steal it, not even you know who. But what if Professor Dumbledore leaves? He can't be in school forever. Hermione found a loophole in Hagrid's words. Then there will be other professors to protect it. You, Little first-year wizards won't need it. What you should do now is study hard, Hagrid cut in, his expression indicating he didn't want to continue the conversation. Harry and the others exchanged glances and dropped the subject. Guan Qiong, reading a book and eating a rock cake, didn't join in the conversation. There wasn't much to say. Hagrid's approach was correct, but he clearly didn't understand Hermione's initiative and drive. Ultimately, they were bound to break through those traps. Hermione and Harry didn't stay long. After discovering Hagrid's silence about the Philosopher's Stone, they left disappointed. Before leaving, Ron curiously asked Hagrid how he got the dragon egg. Hagrid said he won it while drinking with someone in the village, his face beaming with joy and pride. Hermione kindly reminded Hagrid that raising a dragon was a complex undertaking, requiring a lot of consideration. Hagrid happily said that Guan Qiong would help him, saying that Guan Qiong had read numerous books about dragons and that he only needed to listen to her. Hermione glared at Guan Qiong again, then reluctantly said they should be careful not to be discovered by the school, as they might be arrested and even imprisoned in Azkaban. Furthermore, Hagrid's house was entirely made of wood, so Guan Qiong was told to be careful not to set it on fire. Guan Qiong simply nodded, unconcerned. He was fully prepared for the dragon, so there wouldn't be any accidents. I can't believe Hagrid actually got a dragon egg. I always thought that kind of thing only happened in novels, Ron said excitedly. The three of them walked back to Hogwarts Castle. Jean wanted to observe the dragon egg a little longer and didn't leave with him. That's normal. Hagrid has always wanted to have a dragon. He's been following all the news about dragons, so he's bound to come across one, Hermione said, a look of worry crossing her face. I'm a little worried about Jean. If he's caught having a dragon at school, he'll definitely be expelled, but it's Hagrid's dragon. I don't want them to be found out, but if they do, Hagrid should be the one to be punished, Harry said worriedly. Come on, I think Jean is more concerned than Hagrid, Ron said. Did you just see? Next to Jean, there's a notebook filled with drawings of dragon eggs. I've only ever seen that kind of thing at Charlie's. Charlie? Harry asked, puzzled, and Hermione looked at Ron. Charlie is my older brother. You know, I have 5 brothers, and Charlie is the second. He's loved dragons since he was a kid. He's now studying dragons in Romania, and his room is full of notebooks like that, Ron said. Then, he laughed and told Harry and Ron a funny story. One time, Charlie came home from school, and I saw him crawling around his room. His posture was very strange and awkward. I asked him what was wrong, and he said that one of his dragons walked like that. They thought it was injured, but they couldn't find the cause, so he tried to pretend to be a dragon to see what was causing it. What happened next? Harry asked, fascinated. It seems they found out it was a problem with the dragon's kidneys. They couldn't find the cause because the dragon was too embarrassed to have problems there, so they wouldn't let them check it. Ron scratched his head. Are you saying Joan will crawl around like Charlie? Hermione asked worriedly. Chapter 33 Hatching. As time went on, Guan Qiong's life became increasingly polarized. Besides attending classes, he spent his time in Hagrid's hut. As for his homework, he completed it all in defense against the dark arts class, and Quirrell ignored him. Hermione, however, looked at him with concern, as if afraid he might stray into a path of no return. Guan Qiong, somewhat unable to follow the little girl's thoughts, ignored her. Children's minds are hard to guess, girls' minds are hard to guess, and little girls' minds are the hardest to guess. This was probably the only lesson Guan Qiong had learned from his previous life. His observation of the dragon egg continued, and the magical circuitry within it became increasingly sophisticated, eventually requiring Guan Qiong to draw a complete circuit over 3 pages. This, however, also enabled him to accurately predict the dragon's hatching time. One day, when Harry and the others received Hagrid's note and rushed to the hut, Guan Qiong had already been waiting inside for a long time. June, you didn't go to class just now. Upon arriving at the hut, Hermione didn't check on the dragon egg, but instead questioned Guan Qiong. She felt that Guan Qiong seemed to be pouring too much energy into the dragon egg. She rarely saw him during her free time. In the mornings, if she didn't have classes, he'd go straight to Hagrid's hut, and wouldn't return until bedtime each night. He was no longer seen in the library, nor in the Gryffindor common room. He had only been seen in the classroom in Hagrid's hut. When she received the note today, she even noticed that Guan Qiong had skipped the last class. Furthermore, Guan Qiong's notebook was filling up with more and more information. Hermione had glanced at it before, and it was filled with incomprehensible symbols. She wondered what he was researching. This worried Hermione, as she felt Guan Qiong was too obsessed, much like Ron had said about Charlie. Just now it was history of magic. "I told Professor Binns in advance," Guan Qiong said. As he spoke, his eyes never left the egg on the table. He held a notebook and a quill, ready to record the dragon's hatching. Hermione was about to say something, but Harry and Ron had already excitedly squeezed in, standing alongside Hagrid, Gwen, and the others, staring intently at the dragon egg on the table. Hermione sighed helplessly and followed suit. She was curious about the dragon's hatching process, and about dragons themselves. After all, they were a species she had never seen before, though she had heard of them. The egg lay on the table, a deep crack already forming inside. Something seemed to be spinning inside, making a clicking sound, like teeth gnashing. Then came a sharp scraping sound, like nails scraping against a blackboard, which made one frown. Fortunately, the sound didn't last long. The eggshell split open at the crack, breaking in two, and a dark mass of flesh, covered in white slime, rolled out. Hagrid's breath nearly stopped. He reached out, wanting to pick up the poor creature and give it a hot bath and a good clean. But Gwen's wand, placed across his hand, stopped him. "Wait, let's see." A speck of light appeared before Hagrid, making him hesitate. But he paused, remembering that Guan Qiong loved the little creature as much as he did and wouldn't harm it. The fleshy mass squirmed, its body slowly expanding, like a compressed inflatable toy being inflated. Only then did Harry and the others see the dragon in its entirety. It was indeed a dragon. Its form resembled a wrinkled black umbrella, battered by a strong wind. Its wings, longer than its entire body, hung low over its thin frame like a thin quilt, covered in unpleasant spikes that could prick a sleeping person. It also had a large, horse-like snout with white nostrils, and a few small horns on its head, likely from which ferocious dragon horns would sprout in the future. Its eyes were an orange-red, now very dim, like a dying fire, emitting its last glimmer of light. Covered in slime, it lay limp on the ground. It tried to lift its head or wings, but only collapsed, uttering a faint groan. "Oh!" Hagrid reached out to help it, but Guan Qiong stopped it. Guan Qiong looked at the dragon before him. From his magical perspective, the dragon cub's magical circuits seemed incredibly weak, even the obscured glow of the nearby fireplace outshined it. As expected, dragonflies not hatched with dragon's breath are inherently deficient. Guan Qiong recalled what he had read in a book. Mother dragons breathe dragon's breath on their eggs not just to maintain the right incubation temperature, but also because it imbues them with their power and certain substances. These substances slowly seep into the egg, providing the young dragon within with the rare elements it needs to develop. The dragon egg Hagrid had one obviously lacked these qualities, resulting in its developmental deficiencies and extreme weakness. If it can't absorb the slime from the eggshells, it might not survive long. Just like a spotted deer born on the prairie, if it doesn't stand up within a certain time frame, it will be killed by predators. Of course, their mothers can provide some assistance. Guan Qiong waved her wand, a faint silver gleam in her eyes. Wingardium Leviosa. A levitation spell was cast, affecting the fire dragon. Guan Qiong diligently controlled the spell's magical circuits, ensuring they wouldn't significantly impact the dragon's own vital circuits. Simultaneously, Guan Qiong controlled the spell's power, creating a buoyancy just equal to the dragon's weight, or even less. The fire dragon suddenly felt the weight of gravity weaken. It tried to lift its head, and without the restraint of gravity, it succeeded. Its orange-red eyes met Guan Qiong's silver-tinged black pupils, as if sensing the magic power of the person before it, aiding it. It hummed softly, turned its head, and licked the slime from its body. As the slime was licked clean, it seemed to regain its spirits. Its eyes began to light up, its glittering pupils ablaze with orange-red flames. Then, it hummed softly to Guan Qiong again, turned its head, and crawled back toward its eggshell. That was the real feast, the things on its body were merely appetizers. Guan Qiong let out a soft breath, lowered her wand, and lifted the levitation spell. The fire dragon merely paused, slowing slightly, but it could still continue its movement. Chapter 34 Second State Magic Circuit. Watching the little dragon slurping away at its eggshell, Hagrid's heart melted. He wanted to pick it up, but he was afraid he'd do something wrong, so he looked at Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong ignored Hagrid, his full attention focused on the dragon. Through his magical vision, he saw what he was looking for, A circuit pattern completely different from the dragon egg, and even from what Guan Qiong had recorded yesterday. With its first breath of air, the dragon's magical circuits shifted in ways Guan Qiong couldn't understand, ultimately taking on its current form. The crown-like magical circuits had become the dragon's life circuits, and above them, countless new ones sprouted as the dragon lapped up the slime and devoured the eggshell. It's hard to describe their appearance: swirling water plants, a winding river, or layers of windblown feathers. They covered the dragon's life circuits, giving it the appearance of a dense, fine, reddish down. As the fire dragon ate, a green glow emerged from its life circuits, scattering across the fuzzy magic circuits, causing them to dance like grass swaying in the wind. Meanwhile, the fire dragon's body continued its slow growth amidst this dance. Compared to the dry, emaciated appearance it had exhibited just after emerging from the egg, it now appeared stronger and more energetic. It sneezed, then raised its head and gazed at Guan Qiong with a clear, babbling sound. Its amber eyes reflected Guan Qiong's features, her black hair and dark pupils leaving a deep impression in its mind. "Mom," Guan Qiong looked at the fire dragon and waved her wand. The little curse passed around by the students instantly activated, but it only affected the fire dragon itself. A modified version of the leg lock. The fire dragon's open mouth was instantly locked shut, its wings pulled apart, its legs pulled from behind, leaving only its two hands, also bound together. Like a specimen. The dragon blinked its sparkling eyes as it gazed at Guan Qiong. It didn't struggle much, sensing her presence through the magic that bound it, and it felt reassured. It felt like a mother's hand caressing its body, though its wings were a little painful from the tugging. "Qiong, what are you doing?" Hagrid asked, his face thick with anxiety. If it weren't for the fact that Guan Qiong knew dragons better than he did, and that he knew she wouldn't harm them, he would have rescued the dragon and held it in his arms. The sight of the little creature, those eyes, those wings, so adorable. Hagrid's heart melted, as if a breath of dragon's breath had pierced it. "Check your body." A light appeared before Hagrid, dispelling his thoughts. Guan Qiong's eyes lit up with seriousness. He waved his wand, and a long-prepared ruler flew out, landing on the dragon's body, measuring various parameters. Meanwhile, in a nearby notebook, a quill automatically wrote down the dragon's various physical parameters, along with any discrepancies from the standard and suggestions for future training. In mid-air, dots of light, following Guan Qiong's thoughts, formed into rows of text, explaining to Hagrid, Hermione, and the others: length 1 foot 2 inches, 35 cm, wingspan 1 foot 6 inches, 45.7 cm, weight approximately 4.2 pounds, 1902 grams. Compared to a standard Norwegian Ridgeback drake, it's thinner and needs to be fed more meat. Also, the amount of chicken blood brandy should be reduced, it can't tolerate too much alcohol. Cabbage grass can be fed for the first week, but flint should be introduced in the second week, otherwise it won't be able to absorb it. Guan Qiong wrote down the data and feeding standards in her notebook. Of course, all of this was done by Hagrid, who had classes to attend, and at most would come here to check on the situation during his free time. Also recorded was the dragon's magical circuits. Guan Qiong felt that the fire curse was not far away. With a wave of Guan Qiong's wand, the dragon's leg-locking curse was lifted, and the dragon struggled to its feet and crawled towards Guan Qiong. Having received a nod from Guan Qiong, Hagrid could no longer hold back. He scooped up the dragon and cradled it in his arms, reaching out his massive hand to stroke its head. However, the dragon bit his finger, and the dragon struggled to escape Hagrid's arms. "Oh, look at him, how active he is. He's sure to grow up to be a healthy young man. Jean, what do you think we should name him? How about Norbert?" "I think that'll be perfect." Hagrid's face beamed with happiness. He felt his life had never been more fulfilling. He had a friend who shared his interests and loved rock biscuits, and he even had a dragon of his own. The dragon might be a little naughty right now, but that didn't matter. He would teach it a lesson, just like Fluffy and Aragog. Guan Qiong flipped through his notebook, checking for any omissions or errors. He paused at Hagrid's words. A light appeared before Hagrid. "This dragon is female. If I had to give her a name, I think we could call her Norma." "Sure. I'll raise her to be a proper lady, guaranteed to charm the other dragons," Hagrid said excitedly, the dragon repeatedly trying to escape his arms. "Norma? That's a good name, Hagrid. Let me take another look. I haven't seen enough just now." Ron stood on tiptoe, trying to get another look at the dragon, but suddenly a fang-filled mouth appeared before him, startling him. He recoiled in fear as Norma opened her mouth towards him, revealing her sharp fangs. Look, look! She tried to bite me. She tried to bite me just now. She almost bit my nose, Ron said, his face pale, covering his nose. You scared her. Baby dragons are very wary creatures. They only allow their own kind to get close to them, Hermione said with a frown. Guan Qiong had finished writing down her notes and smiled at the startled Ron. He stood up and held out his hand to the dragon. The dragon excitedly flew toward him, and Hagrid reluctantly let go. The dragon, petite to Hagrid, seemed enormous in Guan Qiong's arms, like a large, hairless black cat, nestling in Guan Qiong's arms. Its two broad, thin wings covered Guan Qiong like a black blanket. Guan Qiong reached out and stroked Norma's head, while Norma rubbed her head against Guan Qiong's hand, appearing to be closer. Ron stood by, only envious. He also wanted to hold the dragon. That was something he could brag about to Fred, George, and Percy for a year. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 Dragon and Malfoy. Guan Qiong stroked Norma's head, her mood brightening. This was a dragon, though Western dragons were more like large lizards. Still, the very name dragon made it something truly extraordinary. Honestly, even without the fire spell, Guan Qiong would have been so devoted to this dragon, if only for the sheer pleasure of being able to sit on the sofa and pet it like this. It was infinitely more pleasurable than petting a cat, both physically and mentally. Harry and Ron stood nearby, a bit envious, but there was nothing they could do. As soon as they approached Guan Qiong, Norma raised her head and growled at them, baring her fangs. Although Guan Qiong's soothing words prevented Norma from attacking, it was clear they couldn't touch the dragon. Hermione, standing nearby, felt a little moved, but more so, she was concerned about the future. June, you won't be able to keep her for long. Norwegian ridgebacks grow fast. In a few days, Hagrid's hut will be too big to hide in, Hermione said. Oh, Hermione, don't be like that. Look how cute she is, Hagrid said. It's not just about being cute. If the school finds out, Norma will still be sent away, and you two will face punishment, maybe even expulsion from Hogwarts, Hermione warned. That's true, Guan Qiong said. But Norma doesn't have a mother dragon, so she's weaker than a normal baby dragon. She needs good care now. When she's older and stronger and can live on her own, then we can consider releasing her. Guan Qiong had never considered keeping Norma with him forever. Although he thought having a dragon would be wonderful, it wasn't right now. He wasn't financially or personally capable of raising one, so Norma's final destination would be the same as before, sent to Romania to live with Ron's brother, Charlie. This was the best option for Norma, Hagrid, and Guan Qiong. Of course, Guan Qiong wasn't lying. Without a mother dragon's breath and early care, Norma was inherently weaker than the other young dragons. Not only could she not withstand the long journey, but she would also be bullied by other dragons if she were sent there. This wouldn't work. After all, it was Guan Qiong's dragon, so it was definitely Norma who'd bully the others. Therefore, Norma would have to stay here for a while to be cared for, not just fattened up, but at least strong. Furthermore, Guan Qiong couldn't cast the fire spell until Norma could breathe again, so that he could record Norma's magic circuit. That should be the last one. Guan Qiong had a premonition, like looking at a clear sky and feeling it was going to rain today, unfounded, but remarkably accurate. Hermione breathed a sigh of relief. Guan Qiong's agreement showed that he hadn't lost his mind and become reckless over the dragon incident. Hermione turned to look at Hagrid, whose eyes were filled with sadness at what they had said. Really? Really? Can't we keep this child? I could raise her in the Forbidden Forest. It's big enough, and there are plenty of other magical creatures there. She'll make some great friends. Hagrid wanted to keep Norma. God knows how much he wanted a dragon of his own. Hagrid, Hermione was about to persuade Hagrid, but Hagrid's face suddenly turned pale. He leaped up with an agility that belied his size, and ran to the window. What's going on? Harry asked. Ron looked at the door in surprise. It had already opened. He saw Guan Qiong fling the dragon out of her body the moment Hagrid jumped. And then her body flew out. Before Ron could even confirm it, Guan Qiong had disappeared from his sight. The throne dragon. Ron turned his gaze back to see Hermione and Norma staring at each other, neither of them looking away. Hermione didn't dare, because Norma was lying on her lap, wings spread out on either side of the sofa, hands and feet clinging to her wizard robes. Norma's head lifted, meeting Hermione's gaze. Ron, standing beside her, didn't dare breathe. From her current position, Norma could easily bite Hermione's face with a single stretch of her neck. They were sure that even though she was just a newborn dragon, her sharp teeth would draw blood. But Norma simply nuzzled her head against Hermione's chest before dozing off again, wings folded, and curled up in Hermione's lap. Someone was peeking through the curtains just now. "It's a boy, running towards the school," Hagrid replied, his tone tinged with worry. Whoever it was, the boy had already noticed Norma's presence and was hoping that Guan Qiong, who had rushed out at the first opportunity, could stop him. Harry and Ron exchanged a glance, a foreboding feeling welling up in their faces. Although they hadn't seen the boy's background, their immediate thought was Malfoy. Whenever something bad happened or was about to happen, it was always Malfoy's fault. 9 times out of 10, it was Malfoy's fault, and if it wasn't, it was his. Guan Qiong sprinted across the lawn, chasing Malfoy ahead. The dragon's hatching drew his attention, causing him to forget something. In the book, Malfoy saw the dragon and reported it to Professor McGonagall while they were relocating it. Although the dragon was safely relocated, Harry, Hermione, Neville, and Malfoy were all captured and later punished by patrolling the Forbidden Forest. Guan Qiong was there, of course, to prevent this from happening. Although he had always taken a laissez-faire approach to matters involving Hermione and the others, now that this matter involved him, it became his responsibility, and he naturally wanted to make things happen his way. Adhering to the principle of less is more, it was best to silence Malfoy. Otherwise, if anything went wrong midway, he would be the one in trouble. After all, it was his dragon. Guan Qiong was very fast. His years of training in rock cakes had given him a physical fitness far superior to that of his peers. His body seemed to defy gravity, allowing Guan Qiong to leap great distances in a single bound. In just a moment, Guan Qiong had overtaken Malfoy and arrived in front of him. He waved his wand, and Malfoy's body suddenly floated up. No matter how Malfoy struggled with his feet, it was useless. "Qiong, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were there. I went with Potter and the others," Malfoy panicked and hurriedly explained. "I didn't see anything, I didn't hear anything, everything I said is true. Please let me go, Qiong." Malfoy begged for mercy, as he found that his body was beginning to turn over, and his head and feet began to switch positions. Chapter 36, The Way to Punish Malfoy. "You act like a smart guy now, Malfoy, but if you were really smart, you shouldn't have come here." A point of light appeared in front of Malfoy, spinning as he tumbled over the ground. Guan Qiong stared at Malfoy, wondering what to do. It was impossible to shut Malfoy up completely. This was a school, after all, and he wasn't some bad guy. But letting Malfoy go so easily wasn't an option either. He needed to be taught a lesson, so he wouldn't talk nonsense again. With this in mind, Guan Qiong didn't give Malfoy another chance to speak, and simply waved her wand. Malfoy's body began to rise, like a kite, quickly reaching a height of tens of meters. At this height, even with a softening spell cast on the ground, it would still be subject to significant impact, and if he wasn't positioned correctly, he could even lose his limbs. Malfoy began to scream shrilly, his body thrashing wildly, trying to get Guan Qiong to let him down. But Guan Qiong remained unmoved. With a flick of her wand, she cancelled the levitation spell on Malfoy. Malfoy, previously suspended in midair, suddenly felt the pull of gravity, pulling him downward. Gravity hammered at his body, its force transmitting from the outside in. He tried to open his mouth to shout, but the oncoming wind blew it away. 10 meters passed in a flash. Just as Malfoy was about to hit the ground, Guan Qiong waved his magic, and the levitation charm was cast upon Malfoy again. But this time, the levitation charm wasn't as slow as before. Guan Qiong injected more magic power into it, so that it not only offset the weight of Malfoy's body but also gave him an upward force, roughly equal to gravity. Thus, Malfoy's body was caught between the two forces, the speed caused by inertia forcibly dissipated, and then accelerated in the opposite direction. Malfoy felt his heart pounding in his throat, waiting for him to jump out as soon as he opened his mouth. He had to cover his mouth tightly with both hands to prevent it from opening. Guan Qiong held the wand below, waving it like a band conductor, controlling Malfoy's body and letting him experience the joy of jumping off a bungee. After several rounds of back and forth, Guan Qiong finally put Malfoy down. Malfoy's face was pale, his head disoriented. He fell to his knees, his mouth open, vomiting bitterly. It was just bitter vomit. It was still a while before dinner, and he hadn't eaten yet. When Malfoy had recovered enough, a light appeared before him. This will probably be something you'll remember. Of course, if you want to experience it again, you're always welcome to come find me. Malfoy's face was as pale as the ghost in the castle. He wanted to promise Qiong that this wouldn't happen again, but the cramping in his stomach made it impossible to speak. Guan Qiong had no interest in Malfoy's promises and turned away. Compared to those vague and powerless promises, this method was more memorable and less offensive. At the very least, Malfoy would never want to offend Qiong again. God knew how many torture methods Qiong had, and he didn't want to try them all. But Malfoy's eyes weren't just filled with fear. He turned towards Hagrid's hut, his eyes filled with resentment. He felt this was a trick by Potter and Weasley against him. Otherwise, why would he have happened to hear about the dragon egg? Otherwise, he wouldn't have followed quietly and suffered all this. Just wait, damn Potter and Weasley, I'll definitely get my revenge. Malfoy thought angrily, clutching his stomach as he slowly walked towards the castle. Jean returned to Hagrid's hut, and Hagrid, Harry, and Ron immediately surrounded him, asking him who it was and if he had caught up. Hermione sat still in her chair, a small dragon still cradling her lap. It was Malfoy, but I warned him not to tell anyone about Norma. Don't worry, Jean reassured them. I just knew it was him, he's the only one who would do that, Ron said indignantly. Sorry, Jean, I guess Ron and I were talking too loudly when we received the letter, so he heard it. Harry apologized to Jean, believing he and Ron had led Malfoy here. This nearly exposed Norma's existence. If the school knew about it, not only would Norma be sent away, but Guan Qiong would also be punished and possibly expelled. Guan Qiong shook his head, indicating that he didn't care. He was still under control, and the problem wasn't too serious. Malfoy had already been disciplined by him, so he probably wouldn't dare do anything again. All that remained was to take care of Norma for a while, until she was done breathing fire. Guan Qiong sat down next to Hermione and held Norma in his arms. Norma, sensing his magical aura, didn't even open her eyes, but simply lifted her head to rub against him before returning to her slumber. Guan Qiong turned to look at Hermione. From his magical perspective, he saw a simple magic circuit on Hermione's hand, like a bracelet. The circuit was dimming, and soon it would disappear. It was the magic circuit he had just added to Hermione's hand. It had no effect, just a simple graphic. He had charged this graphic with a large amount of magic power to ensure it would not disappear before he returned. It was this magical circuit that allowed Norma to accept Hermione, lying comfortably on her lap without attacking her. From the dragon's perspective, it was probably a cushion prepared by her mother, for it carried her mother's magical aura. How does it feel to hold a dragon? A light appeared in front of Hermione. Not bad, if she stays this size, Hermione said. She had been a little frightened at first, especially seeing Norma's fangs, but as Norma lay docilely on her lap, she felt a different feeling. She even had a fleeting thought of wanting to keep Norma forever, but it was only a fleeting thought. She knew full well she didn't have the energy to keep a dragon, and a dragon wouldn't stay this big forever. At least it won't get too big for the next week or two, Guan Qiong said. That's good, Hermione said, but she emphasized, but you have to understand, you can't keep her forever. She'll have to be sent away eventually. I know. Guan Qiong reached out and stroked Norma's back. He could feel Norma's spine and other bones directly. She was still too thin, basically just a skeleton with a layer of flesh attached to it. During this period, he had to think of a way to make Norma stronger. Otherwise, even if she was sent to Charlie, she would be bullied by other dragons. Chapter 37 Genesis. A few days later, on an afternoon without classes, Guan Qiong arrived at Hagrid's hut. Hagrid was in the middle of a fight with Norma. Or rather, it was a one-sided fight. Hagrid didn't fight back, simply letting Norma scratch his face with her claws and tear at his clothes with her teeth, occasionally leaping aside to headbutt Hagrid. Hey, Qiong, you're here. Look how energetic Norma is. She's sure to grow up to be a healthy little girl, Hagrid greeted Guan Qiong as he blocked Norma's attack with his hand. Norma bit Hagrid's arm and hung from it, her tail and wings drooping like a caught fish. When Guan Qiong reached Norma, She swung herself into Guan Qiong's arms, letting him hold her. Guan Qiong breathed a sigh of relief. Honestly, if he hadn't eaten so many rock biscuits recently and his physical fitness had improved, he might not have been able to catch it. At the very least, if Harry and Ron were to come, they would surely be overwhelmed by Norma. Guan Qiong stroked Norma's head, and Norma rubbed her face against his hand. Over the past few days, Norma had transformed. He had grown more than half his size, gained a lot more flesh, and his wings had become stronger. At least it was easier to find the bottles and jars in Hagrid's room. Hagrid pulled out a bottle of brandy from the side and poured the chicken blood he had prepared that morning into it, swirling it vigorously to mix. He then poured the mixture into a basin and placed it on the table next to Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong patted Norma's head, and Norma complied, leaning forward and lowering her head into the basin, chugging down the drink. She also bit into the chicken Hagrid had placed beside her, chewing it vigorously. "Thank you so much, June. If it weren't for you, I don't know what I would have done." Hagrid sighed and sat down on the sofa next to him. His clothes were gnawed with holes, his face and arms were covered in scars, and his already wild beard was now even more tangled, like a tangle of vines in the jungle. "It's okay, it's what I should do," Guan Qiong said. For the past few days, he had been searching for information on dragons, hoping to find a way to strengthen Norma. He also wanted to understand why Norma and Hagrid didn't get along, even though he'd given Hagrid a magic circuit bracelet. Guan Qiong didn't find the answers he sought in the books outside the library, so he turned his attention to the restricted section. Fortunately, he had a good relationship with the professors, and Professor Binns readily approved his questions and pointed him to the books he should read. Genesis, The Battle of Giants and Dragons. The author and exact date of its creation were unknown, and the material itself was extremely unique, resembling dragon skin or the hide of some unknown creature, with a bloody scent. The contents were a chaotic mess. Beyond the main text itself, they were filled with the author's ramblings, anecdotes, horror legends, and all sorts of creepy images and designs. However, the level of contamination itself wasn't particularly high. It was the kind that would make you dizzy if you thought about it too much, but calming if you didn't. After Guan Qiong deliberately ignored some of it, he finally understood the whole story. In ancient times, dating back to the creation of the universe, giants and dragons were sworn enemies. Giants took pride in hunting dragons, and even their coming-of-age ceremony involved a solo hunt for a dragon. Dragons ruled the world, and giants were the few races who dared to resist them. According to the records, the dragons were capable of annihilating the giants, but to instill a sense of security in the dragons and hone the fighting prowess of their young, they intentionally maintained a certain number of giants. The ultimate outcome, of course, was disastrous. In a truly earth-shattering battle, both sides suffered heavy casualties. The dragons were no longer able to rule the world, and the giant population plummeted. And then it ended, the story abruptly ending, the kind that would be reviled if it were in a novel. But Guan Qiong had obtained the information he sought. Hagrid had the blood of a giant, while Norma was a pure fire dragon. Perhaps they had never met, nor had they received any information from their ancestors, but the influence of their blood made them react to each other. In Hagrid's case, it was his constant desire to raise a dragon, for no reason, simply because he wanted to. Guan Qiong suspected that his human blood had distorted the influence of the giant's blood, otherwise Hagrid would have wanted to kill a dragon. Norma, on the other hand, harbored the purest hostility toward Hagrid. Although it was somewhat mitigated by Hagrid's human aura, a fight was inevitable. Guan Qiong sighed as he looked at Norma, slurping brandy beside him, and Hagrid, who looked at Norma with fondness. But this was not without its benefits. Guan Qiong activated his magical perspective and looked at Hagrid. At Hagrid's wounds, fragments of Norma's magical circuits, unintentionally left behind by Hagrid, were visible. These fragments, likely dropped by a tooth or claw attack, were shimmering with a reddish glow. Meanwhile, Hagrid's life circuits were absorbing the fragments of Norma's magic circuits, much like they had absorbed the rock cake. As these fragments were absorbed, Hagrid's life circuits grew thicker and stronger, sprouting new ones, akin to evolution. Guan Qiong turned to look at Norma. Norma didn't have Hagrid's life circuits, and Hagrid was reluctant to destroy them. However, Norma's life circuits were trembling and growing, thicker and stronger than before. Guan Qiong suspected that the battle with the giant had stimulated Norma's dragon bloodline, causing Norma's body to grow in a way Guan Qiong couldn't understand. For one thing, Norma was now significantly stronger than when she'd hatched. According to Guan Qiong's measurements, Norma was now undistinguishable from a standard fire dragon hatchling. Guan Qiong shook his head. He had never thought that the method he had been looking for to make Norma stronger was actually to fight with Hagrid. Fortunately, Hagrid was not at a disadvantage. The giant's blood in his body would probably be activated a little, but it was not clear how much it would be activated. However, these had nothing to do with Guan Qiong. He had no idea about his affairs yet. Guan Qiong picked up a cabbage grass prepared by Hagrid and placed it in front of Norma. Although Norma did not want to eat it, under Guan Qiong's gaze, he still swallowed the cabbage grass and then took a few big sips of wine to calm his throat. Come on, grow up, my fire spell is all depending on you. Guan Qiong patted Norma's head as a compliment and thought to himself. Chapter 38, Norma's Super Growth. In the week after Norma hatched, Harry and Ron were far more exhausted than Gwen. It was unavoidable. They couldn't finish their homework as quickly as Gwen, and with exams approaching, Hermione had made a revision plan for them, refusing to let them leave until they finished. They had to constantly strain their brains, pushing them to work harder to finish everything before going to see Norma. Hermione couldn't understand the boys' obsession with Norma. Although she found her adorable and felt happy holding and caressing her, she wasn't like Harry and Ron, constantly dwelling on her, even neglecting to pay attention during class. As for Gwen, forget it. Although Gwen was diligent in class, he was nowhere to be seen after class. He didn't even return to the Gryffindor common room, but headed straight for Hagrid's hut. Hermione worried that Gwen would stay in Hagrid's hut that night, cuddling and playing with Norma, but thankfully, that didn't happen. In the Gryffindor common room, Ron and Harry sat across from Hermione, staring at her eagerly. Hermione held their homework in her hands, frowning. She closed her eyes as she looked, sighing heavily, as if in agony. Hermione, it's almost done. Norma starts any later. Ron twisted his body, wanting to run to Hagrid's hut right then and there, but he didn't dare. If Hermione stopped grading their homework, it was unimaginable how bad their grades would be. You didn't do this homework seriously at all. How could the Werewolf Council be dissolved in 1429? It wasn't even established that year. What on earth were you thinking? Hermione finally lost control and scolded Ron. And you, Harry, you're no less problematic. The Werewolf Council's purpose is to maintain peace with the wizarding world, not to conquer the world and turn everyone into werewolves. Did you write that from some novel? Hermione turned to Harry, who was humiliated. She couldn't bear to read such homework. Harry and Ron were simply tampering with and rewriting history. Please, Hermione, can we talk about this tonight? Norma won't wait for us, Ron said eagerly. Harry nodded frantically, earning a glare from Hermione. It's just fire, what's so cool about it? Hermione said nonchalantly. But you finished your homework faster than us, Harry whispered. Hermione's homework lay quietly beside them, neatly stacked, but the handwriting was noticeably less meticulous than usual. Hermione blushed, but she defended herself. I usually do my homework just as quickly, but she didn't have the heart to lecture them, so she put the homework aside and nodded. But she also reminded them, make sure you do these homework again tonight. I don't want to see 2 capital D's on your homework tomorrow, promise, Ron replied, and began to run outside, followed closely by Harry. Hermione sighed and followed. The 3 of them arrived at Hagrid's hut. Guan Qiong was already seated inside, holding a crimson stone that smelled of sulfur. Norma, meanwhile, lay sprawled on the table, gripping a rock cake between her paws and tearing at it with her sharp teeth. Crumbs flew out, covering the table. In just a few days, her body had grown again, now 3 times its original length. From a large cat you could hold in your arms, she had grown into a tusk-like dog. Guan Qiong nodded at the 3 of them and continued to examine the stone in his hand. Hagrid, standing nearby, greeted them cheerfully. Hey, you're finally here. This little girl is growing up so fast. If you'd been any later, you wouldn't have seen her. Hagrid's wounds had intensified. His arms were covered in teeth marks, the kind that had etched Norma's image since she was little, witnessing her growth. But his black, beetle-like eyes remained bright. Or perhaps even brighter. If someone had recorded Hagrid's physical data, they would have been surprised to find that he was 5 centimeters taller than he was a week ago. However, given Hagrid's overall size, this change was negligible, so no one noticed. Guan Qiong only noticed that his life circuits were brighter and more complex than before, with many patterns they had never seen before. Thank goodness I made it in time. I thought I was too late, Ron exclaimed excitedly. Fred and George had definitely never seen anything like this. They hadn't even seen a dragon. And he, Ron, had raised a dragon. Ron took 2 steps forward, trying to get closer to Norma, but Norma immediately raised her head warily, growling at him, baring her fangs. Ron had no choice but to step back and approach Guan Qiong. Well, raising a child with the Guan Qiong was considered raising one, after all. He had mixed the chicken blood brandy Norma drank yesterday. When does it start? Hermione calmly approached Norma, stroking her head, and asked Guan Qiong. Norma stretched her long neck and nuzzled her head into Hermione's arms, gently rubbing against her. She had become familiar with Hermione's scent and no longer needed Guan Qiong's magic circuit bracelet. As for Harry and Ron, Guan Qiong didn't want to put them on, even though they had always been fond of Norma. After all, male and female contact was forbidden. Wait until Norma's fire glands are fully developed. About 10 minutes, a dot of light floated in the air. Guan Qiong set the flint aside and looked at Norma through his magical vision. Norma's development was even better than he had expected. He had originally thought it would take until next week to feed Norma the flint for her to breathe the fire. However, Norma's fight with Hagrid had grown considerably. Norma's development had advanced, and her body was stronger than that of a typical dragon, so she could use it now. From Guan Qiong's magical perspective, Norma's magic circuits were even more numerous, many of which were so complex that Guan Qiong couldn't understand or draw them. Meanwhile, at her throat, a new magical circuit was rapidly being constructed, and it would be completed in approximately 10 minutes. That was where the fire glands were located. Once the glands were fully developed and filled with flammable material, Norma would swallow a flint, stimulating her body and releasing her first breath of flame. This breath of fire was crucial for a fire dragon, crucial for its future development and marking the dividing line between juvenile and adult dragons. Fire was also a common tactic used in fighting, often determining the outcome of a battle. After all, the stronger the flames, the better developed their fire glands, and better developed fire glands meant stronger bodies. Therefore, some fire dragon tribes would choose their king through fire breathing, while most dragon tribes chose their kings through physical combat. Chapter 39 The Third State of Flame. Norma's body also began to change. Something within her slender neck seemed to expand, taking on a circular shape. A hollow humming sound echoed with her breaths. Her eyes widened, and she scratched at her throat with her claws, as if trying to dig out something inside. But Guan Qiong stopped her. With a wave of her wand, Guan Qiong used the leg-locking spell to secure Norma's hands. She then approached Norma with a flint. Feeling Guan Qiong's power, Norma restrained herself from struggling, but pain flickered in her eyes as she stared at Guan Qiong with despair. Guan Qiong reached out and pried open Norma's mouth, revealing her ferocious, sharp teeth. Then she placed the flint inside. The flint wasn't as hard as the rock cake, and with a few bites, Norma shattered it into pieces and swallowed it. As the flint entered her mouth, a strong, sulphurous aroma emerged, and black smoke began to billow from Norma's mouth, as if she had eaten a piece of coal. From Guan Qiong's magical perspective, the fragments of the flint's magical circuit acted like catalysts, stimulating Norma's fire glands, allowing them to complete the final stage of development. Then, the magical circuits fully formed and emitted a red glow. Guan Qiong quickly retreated, pulling Hermione with her, and retreated behind Hagrid, leaving only her head exposed to watch Norma. Harry and Ron saw this and also retreated behind Hagrid, who raised his umbrella as if to protect himself. A faint red glow began to appear within Norma's mouth. The light grew brighter and darker, finally transforming into flames, erupting directly from Norma's mouth and radiating outward. Hagrid quickly swung his umbrella and whispered a spell. The flames were blocked by an invisible barrier before reaching Hagrid's house, sending a wave of heat that spread outward, raising the temperature. Fortunately, nothing serious happened. After all, Hagrid was a skilled wizard, and a baby dragon wasn't much of a problem for him. Ron and Harry, watching this scene nearby, had how cool expressions on their faces. Even Hermione was glued to Norma on the table. Guan Qiong was also observing Norma, but from a magical perspective. From his magical perspective, Norma's body was also undergoing drastic changes as the flames erupted. Countless magical circuits melted and then combined. The life circuit seemed to be stimulated, thickening and connecting to Norma's newly formed fire gland. A green light connected to it, turning the fire gland's magical circuit half red and half green. Simultaneously, in front of the fire gland, where Norma's flames had erupted, a new magical circuit appeared. It was a strange circuit, resembling clouds in the sky, dissipating mist, or rising water vapor, constantly waving towards the flames and spreading like fireworks. Guan Qiong couldn't understand it, but he knew it must be the final piece of the fire spell. He pulled out a notebook hidden in his clothes and began to draw according to the magic circuit. Together with the previous observations, there were 3 images in total. One resembled a dragon's wings and a raised head, and also resembled a dragon egg, a simplified crown. Another resembled a hatching of flowing water plants, a winding river, and layers of wind-blown feathers. And finally, a fire-breathing image, resembling clouds in the sky, dispersing mist, and steaming water vapor. These 3 images concealed the true magic circuit of the fire spell. As for its true meaning, now was not the time to study it, so Guan Qiong put them away. Norma finally spit out the contents of her throat. She turned her head and looked at Guan Qiong behind Hagrid, letting out a low, joyful hum, like the croaking of a frog. Guan Qiong came from behind and came to Norma's side, patting her head in encouragement. Norma happily rubbed Guan Qiong's hand, and several small flames flew from her mouth, like fireworks. She had mastered the art of fire breathing, and had gone from a young dragon to a young adult. Ah, did you see that, Harry? She's only so small, and her fire is already that long, Ron said to Harry in amazement, stepping out from behind Hagrid. He held out his hand, trying to measure the length of the flame. I saw it, Ron, Harry said in amazement. He had never imagined that a dragon so small could actually breathe fire so long and thick. If she were a little bigger, her fire would probably burn a hole as big as a window in Aunt Petunia's house. It's a pity we can't take her out. Otherwise, she'd definitely scare that Malfoy guy, maybe even make him call her daddy, Ron said with a hint of regret. He seemed to recall that scene and started to chuckle. Don't even think about it, it's impossible, Hermione said, interrupting their reverie. Actually, we need to get her away as soon as possible. She's not a juvenile anymore. Living here any longer would have a bad impact on her development, Hermione said to Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong paused after stroking Norma's hand and looked down at her. Norma looked at Guan Qiong with her glittering, dawn-colored eyes, nuzzling against his hand, beckoning him not to stop. Hermione, don't do this. She's just a child. If you let her out now, she'll be eaten. Even if she's not, she'll definitely have a rough time, Hagrid said in a low voice. But she's already a young dragon, Hagrid. You can't keep her forever. In fact, your house won't be big enough for her soon. Do you want her to live curled up in here? Hermione asked. Hagrid scratched his head, blinking his black beetle-like eyes, which looked like they were about to burst into tears. He turned to look at Qiong, asking what she thought. Qiong, do you think so too? Guan Qiong sighed deeply. To be honest, he really wanted to keep Norma. Although they hadn't been raising her for long, their feelings were real. And having a dragon of his own was such a cool thing. But just as Hermione said, Norma was already a young dragon, and they couldn't keep her for long. Moreover, keeping her here was not a good thing for her. She needed a wider sky to spread her wings and fly. Hermione is right, Hagrid. Think about the story of Fat Dragon Farron. Hermione's approach is correct, Guan Qiong said. Fat Dragon Farron? Hagrid asked doubtfully, and Hermione had the same expression. But Ron suddenly exclaimed. Yes, Fat Dragon Farron, how could I have forgotten this? Chapter 40, Farron. The others looked at Ron, and even Harry was surprised. It was unimaginable that Ron knew something Hermione didn't. You don't know, Fat Dragon Farron, Ron said in a surprised tone, looking at Harry and Hermione as he realized what was happening. Oh, yes, you haven't lived in Wizarding Society before. Under the gaze of 4 people and a dragon, Ron felt a sense of something he had never experienced before. He puffed out his chest, coughed deliberately, and began to tell the story of Fat Dragon Farron. Farron was a wetlands green dragon born in the wilds east of the river. His species was typically small, feeding on fish and bird eggs in the wetlands. As a small dragon, they lived in family groups to ensure their survival in the wild, which was full of crocodiles and other predators. It was believed that Farron was born into a family rife with tragedy. At his birth, the father died, leaving only the mother to care for the newborn. Wetland green dragons can give birth to 6 or 7 cubs at a time, so Farron had an older brother and perhaps a younger sister. But when their mother went out to forage for food, a pack of wandering hyenas discovered them. All of Farron's siblings were killed, leaving only him, who survived thanks to his mother's timely return. That day, the green dragon mother's wail of pain echoed throughout the Hidden Wilds. With all her siblings dead, the green dragon mother focused all her love on Farron. She was a strong enough mother to single-handedly fight off all the enemies and find enough food. Thus, Farron grew day by day, becoming an adult dragon, having never even left the lair. The green dragon mother forbade her from leaving, fearing she would lose Farron again. At first, Farron couldn't understand this. His desire for the outside world made him want to rebel against his mother, but his mother's injuries from hunting and protecting him held him back. It retreated, for it seemed unnecessary to leave. The mother green dragon remained incredibly powerful, always bringing it plenty of food. All it needed to do was stay within the lair. Time flew by, and Farron surpassed the limits of a green dragon. His body was more than double that of a typical wetlands green dragon, dwarfing the mother green dragon. But he remained obedient to his mother, never considering leaving. He even began to fear the outdoors. Though he had longed countless times before to kiss the breeze beneath the sky, now, even the sound of the wind rustling through the weeds at the lair door made him tremble with fear. But the mother green dragon was old, no longer as strong as before, no longer able to fight all the enemies of the wild. The food he brought back dwindled, and his wounds grew more numerous. Farron considered leaving, but the mother green dragon refused. She was terrified of losing her child. The unimaginable pain was engraved in her heart, and the wound only grew worse with each passing moment. In her mind, her child was still the little Farron who would curl up in a corner. If she were allowed to leave, it would die within half a day. But she, too, was dying. The green dragon mother could sense that her life was drawing to a close, and before she died, she felt compelled to do something for her child. For Farron, the days that followed were long and monotonous. He never saw his mother again, for every time he awoke, she had gone hunting, and when he fell asleep, she hadn't returned. But something was changing. The prey in the lair grew larger and larger, gradually piling up. At first, it was only half his height, then it was as tall as him, and soon, there were 7 or 8 piles of food. The smell in the lair grew unpleasant, a mixture of steaming blood and the beginnings of decay, fermenting into an indescribable odor. Finally, on a stormy night, Farron finally saw his mother again. The green dragon mother seemed to have returned to her youth. Her eyes were as bright as the setting sun shining on rippling water, and her body was so agile that she could fight all day without breaking a sweat. But to Farron, his mother was covered in wounds, bones visible in many places, shattered fascia mingled with blackened blood, like a flower trampled in the mud. Oblivious to her injuries, the green dragon mother dragged a lion into the lair and dragged it to the pile of food. As if exhausted, she looked at her child and sighed deeply. Farron whimpered, tears streaming down her face. The green dragon mother whimpered as well, but she was giving Farron one final command. It's dangerous out there. This food will last you for a long time. Do not go out. Feeling she had accomplished everything, the green dragon mother's strength finally faded. She dragged her broken body to the cavern connecting the lair to the outside world and laid down. She would guard her child here, forever, never letting anything harm it again. She died. For the rest of her life, Farron ate the food the green dragon mother had hunted, even if some of it had rotted. It considered leaving, but its mother's body lay there, as it had in life, making it afraid to move. Even the most abundant food eventually ran out. By the time a third ring of flesh began to form on Farron's belly, the entire nest was empty. It lay resignedly, looking at its mother's body. There was no point in leaving. It had never seen the outside world, never felt a wind, and never hunted. Its entire life had been nothing but eating and sleeping. And now, with everything gone, it was time for sleep. But just as it felt hunger again, it heard digging sounds outside, followed by faint human voices. It couldn't make out, couldn't understand, and didn't want to respond. It seemed to hear someone exclaim, followed by a retching sound, and then an exclamation. Then, the Endangered Dragon Society of England welcomed a new member, Farron, who would be named after him. He would undergo a period of training there, regaining his wildness and hunting abilities, before being released back into the wild. And the last thing, Hermione asked, because Ron suddenly stopped, his face showing aftertaste and regret. He felt that he spoke too fast and didn't control the rhythm well. Chapter 41, The King of the Ridgeback Dragon. Then the child was sent to England's magical menagerie. As the only dragon there, Everyone loved him, and he lived there until his death. It was Hagrid who spoke up, a rare touch of melancholy in his tone. Harry and Hermione looked at Hagrid, who scratched his head, stood up, and began rummaging through his belongings. Finally, he pulled out an old photo and handed it to the group. "I've been to that menagerie before, and I even took a photo with Farron. It's been so long, though, I've forgotten it." Hagrid's eyes sparkled. When he first heard the story, he felt a strong resemblance to the Green Dragon Mother, willing to give everything for these adorable children. Harry and Hermione held up the photo, while Gwen and Ron joined them. The photo was taken about 30 years ago, when Hagrid was a bit grayer and his beard was less dense. Behind Hagrid lay a fenced-off garden. A dragon, not unlike Hagrid, lay sprawled on the ground, its eyes half open. Farron's body was practically a circle, its wings surprisingly tiny compared to its body. A dragon's wingspan is typically twice its body length. Farron's head was half the size of its body, giving it the appearance of a sphere stacked atop a larger sphere. It looked more like a giant, hairless cat than a dragon. Guan Qiong was surprised to see Farron in the photo. He'd read Farron's story in the book A Guide to Raising Fire Dragons. Farron was a classic example of the opposite, cautioning against overindulging pets, which can lead to them losing their true nature. But he hadn't expected Farron to grow so large. The hybrid green dragons of the Hidden Wilds typically reach adulthood the size of Fang, a small dragon. Farron's growth to the size of a large dragon was truly remarkable. "Ron, where did you hear this story about Farron?" Harry asked Ron. Hearing Harry's question, Ron explained, "The story of Felon is in a collection of fairy tales. My mother used to tell me the story when we were little. She used Felon as an excuse to keep me doing things, lest I turn into a dragon like Felon, unable to catch a mouse." Hermione nodded in agreement. She looked at Hagrid and said, "Hagrid, did you hear that? Are you planning to raise Norma like Felon, turned up as a zoo dragon?" Hagrid looked at Norma, who bared her teeth and blew streams of fire from her mouth like sparklers. But Felon had a good life in the end. He was in the zoo, loved by many people, and he didn't have to hunt or worry about danger, Hagrid said, struggling, but he seemed a little unsure of what he was saying. Hermione snatched the photo from Ron's hand and pointed at Felon. "But look at Farron. Is he still truly a dragon? Does he really want to live like this?" The photo showed Farron sprawled on the ground. In reality, he no longer had the strength to rise. His weight crushed him, and even the rescue society was helpless, forcing him to be sent to the zoo. Throughout his life, he had never run, never flown, never breathed the free wind, never seen the vast sky. His body had become his prison, and his mind and soul were never free. His mother, with her love, had built a high wall of thought, keeping him captive within. That dark, damp, cold lair had imprisoned him his entire life. All he had rescued was a dragon puppet named Farron. Hagrid wanted to say he would do better than Farron's mother, that he would let Norma fly in the Forbidden Forest, let her run freely, but then he suddenly realized, if Norma remained here, the Forbidden Forest would be nothing more than another green dragon's lair. Norma belonged in the outer skies. She could live better. He just had to let her go. "I understand," Hagrid choked, his hands covering his face. Hermione breathed a sigh of relief. Honestly, after hearing Ron's story about Felon, she'd become even more resolute about sending Norma away. Norma didn't belong here, and neither Hagrid's hut nor the Forbidden Forest could be Norma's paradise. "But where should we send Norma? Can't we just release her somewhere?" Harry suddenly asked. "Hey, maybe send her to Charlie's place? I mean Romania. There are lots of dragons there, so it should be a good place for them to live," Ron said excitedly, feeling incredibly handsome today. "I think that's fine," Hermione said, looking at Guan Qiong. "Let's write a letter and ask first." A light appeared, and Guan Qiong agreed. He looked down at Norma. Norma's eyes were wide open, her pupils a dull circle, staring at Guan Qiong in a daze. She didn't yet know her fate, only watching the chatter of the others. Guan Qiong reached out and scratched the base of Norma's neck. Norma's throat made a low, hollow sound, and her eyes narrowed in satisfaction. Charlie's letter was quickly answered, and the four of them received a reply the following night. "Dear Ron, thank you for writing. I'd be happy to take care of the Norwegian Ridgeback. It's called Norma, right? It's a nice name, if it were a girl. There's a Norwegian Ridgeback colony here in Romania, and of course, there are many other dragon colonies. We can help Norma integrate into the colony. It won't be a problem. She'll find true friends and family, and maybe even become a colony leader. I'll have a group of friends visiting me in a few days. If it's convenient, could you take Norma to the highest tower next Friday night? They can meet you there and bring her to me. Of course, there's a prerequisite. Norma's health needs to be able to withstand the long journey. Honestly, I'm quite concerned about this. Dragons hatched outdoors, without a mother's breath, don't develop well, and many die. I hope you can confirm this. If Norma's health isn't good, we can wait for another opportunity. We'll prioritize Norma. Please reply as soon as possible. Love you. Harry and Ron looked at each other, thinking of the scar Norma had recently inflicted on Hagrid. They decided this shouldn't be a problem. They even had to think about how to get Norma to behave and not hurt those people along the way. Hermione looked at the letter and breathed a sigh of relief. She had been worried that Norma would be discovered and Guan Qiong would be implicated, resulting in punishment or even expulsion. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42, Fire Curse. Ron rode back to Charlie and scheduled the operation for Friday night. Over the following week, Guan Qiong went even more frequently, sometimes even missing from History of Magic and Defense Against the Dark Arts. Ron and Harry would run to Hagrid's hut whenever they could, cherishing every second they spent with Norma, even though they could only watch from the side, not approach or touch her. But they never tired of it. Ron happily remarked that Norma had let him approach to feed her chicken yesterday, and if a few days passed, he might even be able to pat her head. It was a shame, though, that Norma would be sent away in a few days. Ron was deeply regretful and even considered writing to Charlie to postpone Norma's departure. Of course, this was stopped by Hermione and Harry. Even Guan Qiong, who loved Norma the most, didn't side with him. Guan Qiong noticed that the bloodlines in Hagrid and Norma were becoming increasingly powerful. Norma's development had surpassed that of other dragons her age, capable of crushing rock biscuits in one bite. Hagrid's personality had also changed recently, becoming more irritable. Guan Qiong worried that if they stayed together any longer, one of them might become ill-tempered, something he didn't want to see. On Wednesday afternoon, Hermione, who had no classes, finished her homework and headed towards Hagrid's hut. As for Harry and Ron, they estimated they wouldn't finish theirs until evening. Hermione pushed open the door to Hagrid's hut, but Hagrid wasn't inside. It was unclear where she had gone. Guan Qiong sat cross-legged on the sofa, intently poring over his notebook. He kept his free hand, extending his index finger and pointing it in the air. A speck of light danced in the air. Norma stretched her neck, trying to catch it with her mouth, but the light was so flexible that Norma kept twisting her neck, nearly tangling it in a ball of thread. But judging by its flaring tongue and squared-off pupils, it seemed to enjoy this game. "John, you missed History of Magic again today. This is the fourth time you've missed it." Hermione ran over to Guan Qiong and pushed down his notebook with her hand, forcing him to look at her. Guan Qiong paused and looked at Hermione's brown eyes. "I asked Professor Binns for leave." A dot of light appeared between them. Okay, you asked for leave, and Professor Binns will certainly allow you to." But, Hermione said. Hermione couldn't explain why. In terms of grades, Guan Qiong had always been good, unlike Harry and Ron, whose knowledge of History of Magic was even less than hers. Many of the books Guan Qiong recommended to her after reading them were usually read. She decided to change the subject. Seeing Guan Qiong's red eyes and the bloodshot pupils, she asked in confusion, "What have you been doing these days? Why are you so tired?" Guan Qiong closed his eyes, rubbed them, and took a long sip from the coffee beside him. Was this his fourth or fifth cup? He couldn't remember anymore. His mind was now filled with the magic circuits of the fire spell. He'd been busy studying them these past few days. He'd memorized all 3 diagrams of Norma's magic circuits, from the dragon egg to the fire-breathing spell, in his notebook. He'd been studying the relationship between those circuits and the fire spell. Unfortunately, he couldn't understand them. He could imitate the circuits, but he couldn't create fire. Even when he exhausted himself superimposing the 3 circuits, there was no effect, and it only made him exhausted. "It's the fire spell. I've never understood it." Guan Qiong didn't elaborate. After all, explaining something as unique as a magic circuit was too complicated, and Hermione might not understand it. Guan Qiong clapped her hands. "Norma, standing nearby, leaned forward, and from her mouth blew a candle-like flame, casting a red glow over Guan Qiong's face. Guan Qiong activated her magic vision and saw the magic circuits reappear at Norma's throat, dispersing and disappearing like clouds in the sky, dissipating fog, and rising water vapor. He'd tried to simulate this with his magic, but it was no use. He couldn't form a fire charm at all. Guan Qiong reached out and tickled Norma's chin. Norma closed her mouth, narrowed her eyes slightly, and a long, muffled whine escaped her throat, her tail wagging with pleasure. Fire charm, Hermione wondered. She took out her wand and whispered the incantation. Blazing, a bright blue flame emerged from her wand. She controlled the spell so that it, like a candle, only illuminated the surrounding area. Did you have trouble learning the fire charm? Hermione wondered, then suddenly realized. Yes, you're learning silent casting, which is more difficult. Silent casting requires a lot of practice, which is certainly not suitable for you. It also requires a lot of concentration and willpower. That means you need to constantly imagine the spell in your mind, and you must concentrate completely on it. Of course, the wand also has an impact. Hermione read out the description she had read in her extracurricular books. She was very smart and had a good memory, so she memorized everything perfectly. Unfortunately, this was of no use to Guan Qiong. Unlike the others, he cast spells silently, mimicking the circuits of spells. This method had never failed before. He had mastered the illumination charm, levitation charm, unlocking charm, locking charm, and softening charm through his circuits. Because of his circuits, his spells were far more skilled and powerful than those of ordinary wizards. At the very least, Hermione couldn't manipulate so many points of light to form sentences like Guan Qiong, nor could she cast a softening charm on the rock cake. If she did, the rock cake would simply become mushy, instead of retaining its crispy texture, and the strengthening effect would be lost. As Guan Qiong listened to Hermione's lecture, he pondered. What was missing from the fire charm? The crown, the flowing water plants and cascading feathers, the clouds in the sky and the steaming water vapor. What did all this represent? How could he understand the circuits of the fire charm? Inadvertently, he looked at Hermione with his magical perspective. The wand in Hermione's hand was still casting blue flames, while Norma next to her was playfully spitting out cyan flames, which collided with Hermione's flames. In Hermione's flames, he also saw the magic circuit. This time, the magic circuit seemed familiar. How about it, Joan? Do you understand what I mean? Hermione finished reading the knowledge point, and then looked at Joan expectantly. At the same time, the flame in her wand disappeared. Cast a fire spell again, Hermione. A light spot appeared in front of Hermione. Joan's eyes were shining with excitement, and he looked at Hermione. Cast a fire spell again, for me. Chapter 43 Norma's Animation. Looking at the point of light before her, Hermione blushed slightly, unsure why. But she nodded and held up her wand. Blazing, a bright blue flame reappeared on the wand, appearing before Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong activated his magical vision and watched as the magical circuits within the flames constantly shifted. This was precisely what had previously baffled him. The seemingly random changes in the magical circuits of the fire spell had made it difficult for him to learn. But today, as he watched Hermione perform the fire spell, he discovered that the ever-shifting circuits followed three fixed patterns. It began as a fixed point, then grew outward, forming a crown-like pattern. Then, the crown began to melt, and the three previously separate, rigid strands softened like water would. Countless feather-like magical circuits emerged, flowing outward like a gentle river as the flames burned. Finally, the water weed rose upward, transforming into clouds. The fluttering feathers became transparent. The light river evaporated. Everything seemed to disintegrate into its most basic particles, dispersing like fireworks. But then, everything gathered again, transforming back into the crown pattern. Guan Qiong opened his eyes, understanding it all. He finally grasped the mysteries of the fire spell, the magical circuitry of the fire spell. To put it simply, fire, like water, undergoes three phases of change. It begins as a solid crown, then a liquid river, floating around like water would. Finally, it transforms into a gaseous cloud and vapor, dissipating. But the magical circuit repeats itself, so everything solidifies back into the original crown. It's a constantly changing magical circuit, but it has three basic circuit patterns, the ones Guan Qiong had recorded. As for the previously incomprehensible patterns Guan Qiong had seen, They were merely intermediate states in the circuit's evolution, requiring no further comprehension. Guan Qiong took a deep breath and drew out his wand. He waved his wand lightly, shouting inwardly. Blazing, under his control, magic power formed the first magical circuit, transforming into a solidified crown. Then, he controlled it, flowing and spreading outward like molten gold, finally evaporating. As Guan Qiong controlled the evaporating particles to form a solidified crown again, star-like red sparks erupted from the tip of his wand. Then, brilliant red flames, like summer fireworks, danced in front of Guan Qiong's wand. Success! Guan Qiong smiled happily, looking at Hermione. Did it work? I told you, Qiong, you must have missed something. Silent casting is a little difficult, but it's not a problem for you. Just keep thinking about the spell in your mind and focus all your attention, and you'll definitely succeed. Hermione raised her nose, a look of satisfaction on her face. Her wand still emitted blue flames, which, combined with the Guan Qiong's red flames, split the entire room into two colors. Woo! Ooh! Norma jumped for joy, her eyes wide as she watched the flames emanate from the two wands. A purring sound echoed through her throat, and a cyan flame erupted from it. The cyan flame collided with the other flames, tangling and twisting, transforming into a colorful candle. Norma's tail wagged wildly. This game was so much fun, she wanted to play it every day. However, Hermione was only a junior wizard, and unlike Guan Qiong, she lacked the magical power she possessed. She was the first to give in, and the flames trembled a few times before extinguishing. Guan Qiong also put away her fire spell, causing Norma to growl in dissatisfaction and let out a grumble of protest. Guan Qiong reached out and scratched Norma's chin, calming her down. Then he put away his notebook and sighed, feeling relieved and relaxed. June, have you told Norma you're sending her away? Hermione suddenly asked. If Norma resisted, escorting her away would be extremely inconvenient, and Filch could easily catch her. Furthermore, the group arrived on flying broomsticks, and if Norma didn't cooperate, she might fall. She couldn't fly yet, and she hadn't had the chance to practice. Guan Qiong looked at Norma and nodded. He thought it was time to let Norma know about this. He thought for a moment, then extended his right hand in front of Norma. Norma nuzzled Guan Qiong's palm, and the warm breath tickled Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong also touched Norma's head, and a light flashed from his hand. Norma's pupils suddenly turned from vertical to square, and she stared at the light flash with excitement, her tail lashing out involuntarily. But Guan Qiong held down her head, and the light flashed under Guan Qiong's control, gradually converging. Some of the light flashed into long strips, becoming the head and tail, while others formed thin feathers, connecting to them to form wings. It was the enchanting Norma. Norma's eyes widened at the sight before her. But things weren't over yet. More and more points of light appeared, coalescing into the shapes of Guan Qiong and Harry. They moved to Norma's side, and a box of light flew over from the side. Norma, the light point, entered the box, then was carried by Harry and Guan Qiong to a distant spot. From afar, light-pointed figures with jagged brooms flew over. Harry and Guan Qiong handed the box to them, and the figures, carrying Norma inside, flew off into the distance. Seeing this, Norma couldn't help herself. Her excitement widened, and she let out a ho-ho sound from her throat, like a tiger about to attack. But Guan Qiong's other hand pressed down on her head, immobilizing her. Meanwhile, the light-pointed figures flew to another location and released Norma from the box. Meanwhile, countless dragons, similar in appearance to Norma, only larger, flew over from elsewhere. They gathered around Norma, flapping their wings and howling silently at the sky. Finally, they flapped their wings together and flew off into the distance. Then, the light dissipated. Guan Qiong looked at Norma, grasping her head with both hands, forcing her amber eyes to look into his. Although Guan Qiong couldn't speak and Norma couldn't read, from the animation and Guan Qiong's gaze, Norma understood. Dragons are, after all, intelligent creatures. You must leave here and find your tribe. Only there will you feel less lonely and be able to soar freely. Chapter 44. Everything is ready. Everything had been thought to go smoothly. On Friday night, Gwen and Ron would take Norma to the tower, hand her over to Charlie's friends, and then take her to Romania. But on Thursday morning, Hagrid first sent Gwen a letter, saying something had happened in the Forbidden Forest. They had to visit the centaurs the next day, and they wanted Harry and Ron to take care of Norma. Gwen explained the situation to the trio, and Harry and Ron were happy. Ron was even pleased. He had always wanted to be involved, and Harry and Gwen were the original candidates. But at noon, Ron ran back from Hagrid's hut, clutching his hand, his face etched with pain. Norma bit me," Ron said. His hand was wrapped in a handkerchief, stained with blood, but thankfully the bleeding had stopped. "I was just helping Norma with the food. You see, June's been detained by Professor Binns, Harry has to play Quidditch, and Hermione hasn't finished her homework, so I'm the one who has to do all this," Ron explained to the trio. As for Hagrid, he was probably in the Forbidden Forest, since Ron didn't see Fang. "But after I helped Norma prepare the chicken blood brandy, it didn't appreciate it and bit my hand." Ron held out his right hand, which had a tooth mark on it. Guan Qiong took a look and saw that Ron's wound was not deep. She could see that Norma didn't use any force at all, or rather, she just scraped it with her teeth. "You must be hiding something. Norma wouldn't hurt anyone without reason. She's gentle and obedient, but she doesn't like others to get close to her." Hermione put her hands on her hips and glared at Ron. "But Norma is a dragon, and dragons are inherently cruel," Ron retorted, but his eyes didn't dare to look at the three of them, instead drifting away. "Norma wouldn't hurt anyone," Guan Qiong said with certainty. It wasn't until the four of them went to Hagrid's hut that afternoon and saw Hagrid that they learned the truth. When Ron arrived that morning, he found Norma sprawled on the floor, sleeping. Norma was leaving the next day, so he thought he'd touch her before she left, so he'd have more confidence when he told Fred and George about it. He even dug out Hagrid's old camera, intending to take a picture as evidence so George and Fred couldn't accuse him of lying. But just as he was about to pick Norma up, she suddenly woke up and, struggling, bared her fangs, lacerated Ron's hand. "You deserved it, and you're lying about Norma," Hermione said angrily, cradling Norma's head. "But Norma's leaving tomorrow. If I don't leave some evidence, I'll tell Fred and George that I took care of dragons. They won't believe me and will even call me a liar," Ron said anxiously. He loved Norma, of course, but it was because, aside from Charlie, none of his brothers had actually seen a dragon, which gave him a sense of superiority. If he could still have a picture, he could hold his head high in front of them. Not even Percy had ever had such an experience. He was so eager to outdo them that even the Mirror of Ares noticed. "Now, you've left evidence, but you tell them it's a fresh dragon bite," Hermione said angrily. "Of course I won't say that. I'll say it was Tooth's bite," Ron muttered. He knew his place. Even before he told George and the others he'd raised a dragon, it was after Norma had been sent away. They initially thought it was just a scratch, nothing serious. But by evening, his hand had swelled to twice its original size. And the wound had turned from blood red to green. Norma's fangs were poisonous, and perhaps most dragon fangs were. Ron was admitted to the hospital that night. Madame Pomfrey applied a similarly green ointment to his hand and bandaged the wound. Of course, he told Madame Pomfrey that the bite was from Tooth's bite, but whether Madame Pomfrey believed him or not was unknown. "Looks like I won't be able to see Norma off tomorrow night. I can't even use my hand right now," Ron said dejectedly, holding up his bandaged hand. "It's okay. Hermione and I are here. We can handle it," Harry reassured her. Hermione nodded. But no one noticed as a figure left the hospital entrance, their footsteps brisk. The next morning, Malfoy, making a rare move, stopped Gwen. "Gwen, if I remember correctly, you're patrolling the Forbidden Forest on Friday night, right?" Malfoy asked expectantly. Gwen looked at Malfoy, confused. "What's going on?" A light appeared in front of Malfoy. "Oh, of course not. I just came to check on you. I heard something's going on in the Forbidden Forest, and I hope you'll be careful." Malfoy seemed to express his genuine concern for Gwen, then smiled and left, his steps brisk. His two lackeys, Goyle and Crabbe, followed closely behind. Gwen was a little confused by Malfoy's train of thought, but she didn't think too much of it. After all, the master's thoughts were beyond the comprehension of someone like him, someone who had never been a master before. At most, he'd teach Malfoy a lesson when he started causing trouble again. He'd recently come up with a number of ways to impress without actually causing harm, just waiting for Malfoy to run into them. Night soon arrived. Hagrid, Harry, Gwen, and Hermione stood in front of Hagrid's hut, where Norma was enjoying her last meal. Hagrid had prepared a large crate for her, also filled with brandy and other food to ensure she wouldn't starve. When the noise inside died down, Gwen opened the door and walked in alone. He had something else to say to Norma. Gwen entered the hut. Norma's bowl was empty. She stared at him with wide eyes, her tail wagging as she reached over to rub against his belly. Gwen stroked her head, then held out her other hand, opened it, and a light flew out from it. Norma's eyes brightened, and she looked at the light, her tail wagging faster. But Guan Qiong wasn't playing a light point chase game with her. Light points continued to emerge, then gathered into the shape of Norma. Surrounding her were other dragons. Norma watched intently. Light point Norma began to grow. When she was as large as the other dragons, she challenged the surrounding dragons, then defeated them one by one, forcing them to submit at her feet and lower their heads. Light point Norma stood in the center, on a throne made of stone. She raised her head and roared silently to the sky. She became king. Chapter 45 Death of the Unicorn. Guan Qiong waved the light away, gazing into Norma's crystal-clear eyes. Do you see? Norma looked back at Guan Qiong, her eyes gleaming with wisdom. I see, Mom. So good. Guan Qiong scratched Norma's chin, then reached out and hugged her. Norma, in turn, placed her paws on Guan Qiong's shoulders. She was so reluctant to let go, but just like the story of the fat dragon Farron, keeping Norma here wouldn't help her grow. She needed a wider, freer world. Guan Qiong patted Norma's head again and led her out of Hagrid's hut. This was her first time outside. Before, she'd been hidden inside to avoid being seen by other students or teachers. Norma sniffed the air outside, a low whimpering sound emanating from her throat, her mouth open as if about to roar. But Guan Qiong reached out with both hands, grasped Norma's jaws, and clamped them together. Okay, that's enough. You can yell again when we get somewhere. Norma blinked, not struggling, but nuzzled Guan Qiong's hand again. Following Guan Qiong's guidance with a light, Norma obediently stepped into the crate prepared for her. Harry and Hermione were already prepared. They covered the crate with their invisibility cloak and then climbed in. Guan Qiong activated her magical vision, watching the magic being pushed aside, and waved. Let's go, June. We have a heavy mission tonight, Hagrid said in a gruff voice, his voice choking with sobs. He was reluctant to see Norma leave. Although Norma disliked him and was always picking fights, he loved her. He even felt that when fighting Norma, he felt like he had returned to his youth, even his body became lighter. Guan Qiong nodded, without controlling the illumination charm to form words. From this moment on, he could not use any more magic, as they were about to enter the Forbidden Forest. The weather was not good today, with dark clouds and a strong wind. Guan Qiong followed behind Hagrid, using a strong and tall body to block the wind. Fang followed closely behind him, keeping a watchful eye on the situation behind them. Recently, due to Norma Long's prestige, Fang had rarely stayed near the hut, often running away. Hagrid held his lantern, emitting a pale glow that illuminated a 5-meter radius. He told Guan Qiong about recent events in the Forbidden Forest. The Forbidden Forest has been in turmoil lately. Many magical creatures have died. They were discovered by centaurs and other groups, and reported to the school, Hagrid said. But they haven't said what attacked them, and the centaurs, the only ones who might know, won't readily share their knowledge. That's why I asked you to come here tonight. Guan Qiong realized that this was because during a previous patrol, the centaur Ronan approached him, hoping he could help him find a potion called Va. The centaur had been noticeably friendlier than the others and had answered his questions, though his answers were still confusing. For a long time afterwards, Guan Qiong had been searching for Va, but there was no sign of it on every patrol route. He searched until his eyes were weary, but he couldn't find it, so he hadn't contacted the centaur. Wait, Hagrid, leading the way, suddenly stopped and spoke in a gravely serious tone. He pulled out his umbrella, held the lantern behind him in his left hand, and handed it to Guan Qiong. Here, June, come over here with the lantern, and stay alert. Fang, pay attention to your surroundings. Hagrid's muscles tensed. His eyes fixed on his surroundings. He inched forward, alerting Guan Qiong and Fang. Guan Qiong followed, carrying the lantern's light. Only then did he see what Hagrid had just seen and understand why he was so nervous. Silver blue blood dripped from the leaves. It was certain that the owner had left here not long ago, as the blood was still steaming. Guan Qiong could even smell it, a tempting aroma. According to Guan Qiong's knowledge, only one creature in the Forbidden Forest possessed blood of that color, a unicorn. It's a unicorn, Hagrid said gravely. He kept a close eye on the surroundings and, after confirming it was safe, he took the lantern from Guan Qiong's hand, but he didn't fold his umbrella. That guy showed up again today, this time targeting a unicorn and injuring it, Hagrid explained to Guan Qiong, even though Guan Qiong had figured it all out. He understood even more clearly than Hagrid did. The one who attacked the unicorn was clearly Voldemort, or rather, Quirrell, possessed by Voldemort. He had been focusing on Norma and studying the fire charm for a while, and had forgotten about Voldemort. Mainly because Voldemort wasn't a serious threat right now, but he couldn't kill him, so he didn't bother. If he remembered all of Harry Potter and knew where all of Voldemort's Horcruxes were, he wouldn't mind finding a way to kill him orally. Unfortunately, he only had a strong memory of the first 3 films, the later ones were mostly clipped fragments. So, while he knew Voldemort had Horcruxes, he only knew one was the diary from his second year, and another was the snake named Nagini. To avoid further confusion, he decided not to interfere with Harry's story. After all, good triumphed over evil in the end, right? John, I'm afraid we can't go to the Centaur tribe. We need to find that guy first and rescue the poor unicorn, Hagrid whispered, as if trying to avoid attracting attention. Guan Qiong nodded, agreeing. Voldemort wasn't particularly powerful right now, and Quirrell had been drained of his life by Voldemort. With a half-giant Hagrid on his side, even if they couldn't defeat him, they could hold out until the Hogwarts students or other creatures from the Forbidden Forest arrived. Hagrid carefully observed the bloodstains on the leaves and finally determined the direction the unicorn had left. This way, Hagrid whispered, breaking off into trot. Guan Qiong followed closely behind, with Fang trailing behind. Navigating the dense forest wasn't easy, especially since they were following a path only animals could traverse, making it a bit difficult. Fortunately, Hagrid's massive size helped Guan Qiong clear a path, preventing him from tripping over the tangled branches and tangled weeds. But by the time they followed the blood trail to the unicorn's location, they were still a step too late. The unicorn was already dead. Chapter 46 Extra, Norma Cat. One day, Guan Qiong skipped school again and went to Hagrid's hut. Norma was leaving in a few days, so he decided to spend more time with her. Entering the hut, Norma was sleeping by the fireplace. Hagrid had probably gone out, leaving Norma alone. Hearing a noise, Norma's cold, vertical pupils widened, but upon seeing Guan Qiong, they instantly shrank back to square, and the once dignified look on her face faded into a silly expression. With a grin on its face, it wheeled over to Guan Qiong's side, rubbing its head against her hand. Guan Qiong scratched its chin and began preparing its food. Chicken blood mixed with brandy, along with a whole, dismembered chicken. In his past life, having cooked frequently, it wasn't a big deal. After helping Norma prepare the food, he also found the ingredients and prepared a plate of raw cakes for himself. They tasted good and were good for growth, perfect for his age. If nothing else, at least he felt stronger than before. A true wizard should cast an illumination spell and wield a sword. Okay, just kidding. His softening magic had largely negated the effect of the rock cake. At most, he was only slightly more developed than his peers. As for the full rock cake, he couldn't bite it, and his body probably couldn't absorb it, since he didn't have giant blood. Sitting leisurely on the sofa, Guan Qiong pulled out a book he'd borrowed from the library. Norma had also finished her meal and now rested her paws on the sofa, her head tilted forward to gaze directly at it. Guan Qiong understood that she wanted to play with him, since she was going to be sent away in a few days. He put the book away, extended his right hand, and a point of light appeared from it. Norma's eyes widened, staring intently at the light, her tail lashing wildly. Guan Qiong suddenly noticed something interesting. He manipulated the light to become a long strip, and Norma's pupils also changed shape. He manipulated it to become a square, and Norma's pupils also became square. He manipulated the light to form a semicircular, inward spinning spiral, and then it spun in front of Norma's eyes. Norma fainted, collapsing onto her back. Well, that pattern was indeed dizzy. Guan Qiong, looking at the pattern, felt a bit dizzy herself, and quickly waved her hand to disperse the light. Once both had recovered, Guan Qiong controlled the light to fly around the hut, while Norma nimbly ran around, occasionally knocking over teacups or pots, or knocking chairs over. Before long, Norma was exhausted and panting, but she was incredibly happy. Her tongue flicked in her mouth, and the scales on her body began to open and close like breathing grass. Hagrid's hut was already a mess. Guan Qiong smiled, dispersed the light, then picked up Norma's head and gently stroked it. What a troublemaker, Guan Qiong sighed, looking at the mess around them. Hagrid's hut was still a little too small. Norma really needed a bigger place. He waved his wand and cast a restoration charm to restore everything back to its previous state, but it didn't make much of a difference, as Hagrid's room was already quite a mess. Hurrah! Norma made a comfortable sound in her throat as Guan Qiong caressed her. Guan Qiong also picked up the book, placed it on Norma's head, and began to read leisurely. Chapter 47 Extra, Charlie's Reply. Dear Ron, Norma has arrived at my place, and everything went very smoothly. I hope the same goes for you. If I remember correctly, Filch would be roaming the castle at night. But I'm sure none of our Weasley children will be caught, and I'm sure the same will be true for you. At least, I haven't heard of George or Fred being caught. Norma is in excellent health. Honestly, I've never seen a dragon so healthy. Did it really hatch from an egg outside? If so, I can only say that your classmate, Guan Qiong, has a talent for caring for magical creatures, perhaps because he's from the East. If possible, please tell him to consider a career in magical creature protection and research after graduation. Believe me, he's well suited for it. Also, I heard you became friends with the famous Harry Potter. That's great. Making a good friend can help you grow, just like how I met Luca Reese. Oh, you don't know him, but we'll talk about him later. Anyway, remember to get along well with Harry, and you'll make great progress. Of course, the adult dragon had some reactions, but we were able to control them. Honestly, it was quite shocking. Also, it seems to be smarter than most young dragons. By the second week, it had already tamed a young dragon and made it its subordinate. This kind of thing usually only happens with adult dragons, so it's not a bad thing. Overall, Norma is doing well here. Although she's growing a little too fast, it's not a major problem. We just want to know if Norma's condition is natural or caused by something she ate or something else. Finally, I heard that Harry Potter was caught for a night out because of Norma's incident, and Gryffindor lost points. He must be very upset right now. You should comfort him. After all, you're friends, right? Perhaps you could ask Fred and George to teach you some night outing techniques. Of course, I don't encourage it, but if you need to, at least it can help you avoid being caught. Also, I hope everything is well at home. Please write back to me soon. Love you, dear Ron. I received your letter and learned that Norma didn't eat anything special, just ordinary chicken blood brandy and chicken. I feel much more relieved. After all, many things have strong side effects, and most young wizards can't tell the difference. Norma is doing better here. She began to tame the young dragons in the Spinaback dragon tribe and became the leader of the younger generation. I have a hunch that it may become the king of this tribe when it grows up. According to our custom, we usually give the dragon king of the tribe a unique name to call them. If it is Norma, perhaps it can be called the King of Wind. Of course, this will have to wait until later. When you are in the 4th or 5th grade, you can come here to see. By then, Norma may have become the King of Wind. Finally, attached is a photo of Norma. Love you. Chapter 48 Forenza. Hogwarts at night held an inexplicable eerie feeling, but Harry felt less frightened when he realized that even the ghosts he encountered would be familiar faces. It's a little cold, he thought, wrapping himself tightly in his clothes. He and Hermione carried a crate containing Norma toward the tower. The dark quarters and the constant howling wind made him feel a chill. This evening's weather is truly awful, Harry thought. Norma was unusually well behaved, making no sound, except for her gentle breathing, which seemed to tinge with excitement. Harry and Hermione climbed floor after floor, finally reaching the tower's steep spiral staircase before their strength ran out. Under the chilly night sky, they removed their invisibility cloak and breathed in the cool air, feeling a sense of relief they had never felt before. Everything had gone smoothly, without incident. They didn't have to wait long before Charlie's friends arrived, 4 of them, all lively and enthusiastic. They secured Norma to her broom with a rope, shook hands with Harry and Hermione, exhorted them to study hard, and then left. Harry and Hermione breathed a sigh of relief as they left with a trunk containing Norma. They quietly descended the spiral staircase, making sure not to make any noise. Everything seemed to be going smoothly today, Harry thought, but then something unexpected happened. Hagrid and Quirrell looked at the unicorn's corpse, momentarily losing their breath. It was a beautiful scene. The unicorn lay on its side, as if asleep, its long legs intertwined like a holy cross, its silver mane gently covering its body like moonlight flowing across the ground. However, the unicorn's neck had been torn open, and blood spurted out, splattering everywhere like a silvery white pearl flower blooming in the darkness. Holiness and death, beauty and blood, all appeared before Qiong and Hagrid simultaneously. The unicorn's corpse lay before them like a rare work of art. "Oh, my God," Hagrid sighed, running over to the unicorn. He reached out his giant hand and gently stroked its head. Guan Qiong followed behind Hagrid, watching the whole thing unfold in silence. He felt a mixture of sadness and anger, even considering heading to the school to find Dumbledore and tell him about Voldemort. But he quickly shook his head, clearing away these thoughts that clearly didn't belong to him, and calmed himself. "Dead," Hagrid said sadly. He stroked the unicorn's head, watching its size close and its body tremble. "Who is it?" Hagrid suddenly stood up, angrily speaking, staring intently at his surroundings. The unicorn still clung to its body, indicating the murderer hadn't gone far. But Hagrid saw no trace of it, and the grass hadn't been trampled, as if the murderer had floated in the air. Hagrid was indignant, but there was nothing he could do. He was a step too late, the murderer had already left, and he couldn't find the direction to follow. Then, footsteps echoed through the dense forest. The sounds came closer and closer, densely packed, as if many people were approaching. Hagrid, shielding Guan Qiong behind him, raised his lantern and wand, watching the direction warily. The weeds and trees pushed aside, and suddenly 3 people ran out in front of Guan Qiong and Hagrid. 3 centaurs. Leading them was Ronan, whom Guan Qiong had met before. His hair flowed like flames in the darkness. He looked at the unicorn on the ground, a look of sorrow on his face. "We are too late," he said. "Fate has foretold its death. It will return to the stars." Beside Ronan, another centaur spoke slowly, his tone calm and solemn, his hands spread apart and raised, like a praying priest. Unlike Ronan, this centaur's fur was platinum, the same color as the unicorn's, and his eyes were a terrifying blue, like the sea. "Hello, Zooxing, my name is Firenze," Firenze said, smiling and greeting Guan Qiong behind Hagrid. Guan Qiong nodded. He had some impression of Firenze, having appeared in the first film, but seeing him in person still left him in awe. His silver fur and blue eyes immediately distinguished him from the other 2 centaurs. He also carried a unique aura of detachment, clearly a unique presence among the centaurs. "Hello, Zooxing, nice to see you again." "Hello, Hagrid, you're here too," Ronan said. Clearly, he treated Guan Qiong better than Hagrid, even though they had been friends for years. "I'm Bane," the last centaur spoke, though he didn't say much, simply introducing himself. He had black fur and a build even more rugged and massive than Roland, making him the largest of the 3. "Ronan, do you know who attacked the unicorn?" Hagrid's voice was strained, his eyes red with anger. Ronan looked at Hagrid without saying a word, his horse's hooves paddling the ground restlessly, the clatter echoing through the forbidden forest. "You know, right? But you can't say, isn't the life of a unicorn important enough? How many more do you want to die in the forbidden forest?" Hagrid, seeing Ronan's expression, grew angry and practically roared. "Sorry, Hagrid, we only follow the guidance of the stars," Firenze said to Hagrid. Roland and Bane stood beside him, like guards protecting him. "I know that, but, after all," Hagrid wanted to argue, but he didn't know how to persuade the centaurs to abandon their traditions and help him find the culprit of the magical creature that was harming the forbidden forest. Dealing with talking creatures was too difficult, he preferred the silent ones, like Norma. Hagrid suddenly thought of Guan Qiong behind him and quickly stepped aside, pushing Guan Qiong out and signaling with his eyes. "Susing, may I ask if Fuhi has been found?" Before Guan Qiong could cast the illumination charm, Firenze spoke first. Guan Qiong was silent for a moment, and a light flew out of his hand. "No, I haven't found any trace of Fuhi." "It doesn't matter," Firenze said nonchalantly. He looked up at the stars, then lowered his head to look at Guan Qiong. His eyes were like a deep ocean, reflecting the countless stars in the sky. "The stars guide all paths. Now is not the time. You will be able to find Fuhi the next time we meet," Firenze said. With that, he turned and left with Roland and Bane. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49, Clever Malfoy. This is too much of a charade. How come the centaurs haven't been killed by other races with their wicked ways? Guan Qiong couldn't help but internally complain. It was mainly because the centaurs' unclear speech was so annoying. And since he knew he'd find Fuo next time, why didn't he just use the stars to calculate Fuo's location instead of having him search for it in the Forbidden Forest? Guan Qiong sighed and shook his head, feeling that he had been unwise to take on this task in the first place. These guys, Hagrid gritted his teeth, but there was nothing he could do. The centaurs weren't affiliated with Hogwarts. While the Forbidden Forest they inhabited was nominally Hogwarts property, they were a separate species. Therefore, no one had any influence over them. Hagrid had originally thought Guan Qiong could improve their relationship, but now it seemed like it was no use. Guan Qiong no longer had a favorable impression of the centaurs. Of course, it wasn't even a negative one, just a desire to kill the Riddler. Hagrid gave up hope of catching the murderer, and there was no need to take Guan Qiong to the centaur tribe today. The two began to collect the unicorn's corpse. Guan Qiong gazed at the unicorn's corpse, opening her magical vision. The unicorn's corpse was beautiful, and so were its own magical circuits, shimmering with a brilliant silver light, like a veil woven from moonlight. Typically, when a creature dies, some of its magical circuits remain, forming magical materials, while others shatter and dissipate, transforming into purest magic. Guan Qiong then watched as a silver light rose from the unicorn's body. Countless particles of light drifted from the unicorn's body, like countless fireflies, flying in all directions before disappearing into the night. It was a scene of immense beauty, but it came at the cost of death. Suddenly, as if a magical circuit had broken and exploded, the particles of light transformed into scattered meteors. The silver light rippled like waves, rushing towards the surrounding void. Guan Qiong rubbed his eyes. When the magic circuit exploded, his vision was blurry, as if disturbed. "Qiong, are you alright?" Hagrid asked, concerned. Guan Qiong shook his head and looked again. The fluctuation had subsided, and he could see the magic circuit clearly again. He took note of what he had just done and followed Hagrid to dispose of the unicorn's body. Out of respect for such a sacred creature, Hagrid only removed some hair from its tail, to be used in a wand-making process, and its horn, magically removed. He left the rest untouched, instead digging a pit with magic and burying it. Hagrid and Guan Qiong then mourned for the unicorn for a short time, wishing its soul rest in the embrace of the Mother of the Forest. Hagrid then used magic to erase all traces of the unicorn's body, preventing it from being discovered or dug up. The patrol ended for the night, and the two headed towards Hogwarts. Guan Qiong prepared to go to bed, while Hagrid prepared to tell Dumbledore what had happened. After all, it was the death of a unicorn, a sacred creature that foreshadowed something unholy, a dark wizard's arrival in the Forbidden Forest. He needed to tell Dumbledore quickly so he could take precautions and make arrangements. Harry and Hermione watched Filch and Malfoy suddenly appear before them from the darkness, feeling that things couldn't get any worse. Not only had they forgotten their invisibility cloak in the tower above, but they were also caught by Filch on their way down. And with Malfoy right beside him, it couldn't have been worse. "Oh, look what I've caught. 2 little nocturnal mice. Aha! Isn't that the famous Harry Potter? Are you out here saving the world at night? This must be Miss Know-It-All, the first-year student. Don't tell me you're out studying in the library at night," Filch said in his slimy, greasy voice, his expression radiating delight. These young wizards, relying on their own little magical skills, ignored him completely, even daring to go out for a night out. Now, he was determined to show them the power of Mr. Filch. He wanted to show them that even though he couldn't use a single spell, he could still keep them in line. Malfoy, standing next to him, was filled with astonishment. "Why is it you, Granger? Why not Weasley?" Malfoy demanded, his voice trembling. Today, while outside the hospital, he heard Weasley say, "Send Norma tomorrow night." Then he heard Potter say, "And me." He realized that the two were sending the dragon away that night. Perhaps they no longer liked it, or perhaps they couldn't keep it anymore, but it didn't matter. He had crucial information. Potter and Weasley were going out for a night out on Friday night. This was the perfect opportunity. He wanted Filch to catch them out and punish them severely. You know, Hogwarts strictly forbids students from leaving their homes at night. These two would undoubtedly face severe punishment, and a significant loss of Gryffindor house points, bringing them complete disgrace within Gryffindor. However, he hadn't anticipated that the Potter boy would be accompanied by Granger. If Gwen knew about this, he shuddered to imagine what would happen. He didn't want to try any of Gwen's inventions again, nor did he want to try anything new. Ron's in the hospital. Harry stared at Malfoy. If the fury in his eyes could have turned to fire, Malfoy would have been incinerated. That guy was just bitten by a dog. How could he be so fragile? Malfoy berated Weasley for his fragility. For tonight's event, he not only confirmed with Gwen that he would go to the Forbidden Forest, but also asked Madame Pomfrey why our Ron was in the hospital. Madame Pomfrey explained that it was a dog bite, and that such an injury, to Madame Pomfrey, was simply a magical one. Malfoy confirmed everything. The people who came tonight were definitely Weasley and Potter, not Guan Qiong or Granger. That's why he reported it to Filch that night. Hearing Malfoy's words, Harry and Hermione looked at him as if he were an idiot. He was just trying to deal with Madame Pomfrey, but this guy actually believed it. Okay, shut up, Filch suddenly said, interrupting the conversation between the three. Come with me. I think Professor McGonagall would be happy to see you at this time, especially you, the famous Miss Know-It-All. I'm sure Professor McGonagall would be surprised. The smile on Filch's face was extremely cold. Hermione's face turned extremely bad. Chapter 50 Punishment and Consequences. Filch led Hermione and Harry to Professor McGonagall's study on the second floor. Malfoy was also brought in, his face as grim as Harry's, as if he had been caught wandering the night before. Hermione's face remained sullen, and Harry wondered what excuse he would have to offer Professor McGonagall. He couldn't say Hagrid and Gwen had a dragon, that would only cause more trouble. But what other excuse could they come up with? Wandering at night was forbidden, especially since they had climbed up to the astronomy tower, which was not normally allowed. Fortunately, Filch hadn't caught Norma, and Malfoy probably wouldn't dare tell anyone about it. He didn't want to provoke Gwen, so things hadn't reached their worst point yet. Professor McGonagall quickly arrived. Oh my god, I can't believe what Filch said. You two. Climbing up the astronomy tower at 1 in the morning, Professor McGonagall's eyes seemed to be spitting fire. I've never heard of anything like this before. Aren't you going to explain? Professor McGonagall stared at Harry and Hermione, making them breathless. But what could they say? What excuse could they use now without arousing suspicion? Seeing their silence, Professor McGonagall glared at them again, then turned her gaze to Malfoy beside her. And you, Mr. Malfoy, what are you doing here, not asleep at this hour? Oh, Professor McGonagall, it was Malfoy who helped me catch those two little wizards wandering around at night. He heard they were planning a night out and came to inform me, Filch defended Malfoy. Professor McGonagall's face seemed frozen. She looked at Malfoy, took 2 deep breaths, and then spoke slowly. Well done, thank you very much, Mr. Malfoy. I will tell Professor Snape about your situation, and he will give you some credit. Now, I hope you can return to your Slytherin dormitory and sleep peacefully. Professor McGonagall's tone was extremely calm, but it was clear that she was not happy. Malfoy walked out the door without saying a word, his face pale, and he showed no joy at having tricked Harry. The night breeze blew, and he shuddered. He seemed to be remembering the bungee jumping Guan Qiong had given him. His face paled even further, almost ghost-like. Now, let me tell you about your business, Professor McGonagall said angrily, looking at Harry and Hermione. No matter what, wandering around Hogwarts in the dead of night is unacceptable. I won't condone you. Gryffindor will lose points for this. Professor McGonagall looked at the two, their panic gazes etched in her voice. 50 points each, and another detention. I hope you'll learn this lesson and never make such a mistake again. Oh, no, Professor, please, Harry begged. If he lost 100 points, Gryffindor's lead would be lost, and his 2 previous Quidditch victories would be in vain. Alright, now, return to the Gryffindor dormitories. I expect you to stay in your beds every night from now on, Professor McGonagall said, sending the 3 of them out. Harry's mind was completely fogged. He couldn't remember how he'd gotten back to his dorm, or how he'd fallen asleep in his bed. What would the Gryffindors think of him tomorrow when they saw their house had been deducted so many points, and it was him who had lost them? Harry pondered this question until sleep could no longer hold him back, and he finally fell into deep sleep. Things were worse than Harry had imagined, or perhaps not. After the Gryffindors learned of Harry and Hermione's actions, their attitude toward them had indeed changed significantly. Wherever they went, they encountered disgruntled faces. But that was it. There were no further repercussions. No one came out to lament Harry, nor did anyone challenge him to a duel or a beating over the incident. This is my fault. I didn't expect Malfoy to complain. I thought my last warning would keep him away from it. Gwen was the first to speak at the Gryffindor table. Gwen, Hermione, Ron, and Harry were the only 4 people in the room. No one, not even Neville or Seamus, dared sit with them, fearing they would be singled out and hated. Gwen only learned of this after waking up this morning. After burying the unicorn's body the previous night, he returned to his dormitories and didn't notice Harry hadn't returned. He believed that last night's operation shouldn't have gone wrong. After Malfoy's shock from his high-altitude bungee jump, he should have stayed away from Norma. Who could have imagined that Malfoy would be so clever as to try to avoid Gwen and Hermione and catch Harry and Ron on a night out? This was nothing short of playing with fire. No, Gwen, this is my fault. I left my invisibility cloak in the astronomy tower, otherwise we wouldn't have been caught, Harry said ruefully. He didn't regret sending Norma away, but was upset that he had forgotten the invisibility cloak. If he had, Filch and Malfoy would have never caught him. Don't dwell on it. They'll definitely forget about it in a few weeks, just like Fred and George. Their pranks always make people very angry, but after a few days, others will forgive them and fall for them again, Ron consoled Harry as he ate his pork chops. They haven't deducted so many points from the house all at once, have they? Harry asked. That's not the case, Ron scratched his head, the oil on his hands making his hair sleek and shiny. As for Hermione, she had been lost in her own world all morning, holding a cut of lamb chop in her hand but not putting it in her mouth for a long time, mumbling something to herself. Guan Qiong snapped her fingers in front of her, finally bringing her back to her senses. Oh, you scared me. Hermione looked at the 3 of them and put the lamb chop into her mouth. After she finished the lamb chop, she explained, this semester, I answered questions in class 32 times. 6 of them were awarded 5 points. I got 3 points twice for doing good homework. And I got 10 points for helping Professor McGonagall organize the review materials. That makes a total of 46 points. Of course, I'm not saying I added points to make up for them. I'm just saying that this matter isn't a big deal. We just need to find a way to make up for the points I lost, Hermione said confidently. Harry and Ron looked at each other. Harry scratched his head and suddenly felt relieved. After all, his Quidditch performance had helped the school score quite a few points. Of course, that wasn't just his own achievement, it was the result of the whole team's efforts. But he also played a part, didn't he? End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all, see you in the next video.